Chapter 925. With the order, the cavalry guarding the library moved. They instantly gathered into a defensive formation, protecting the officers who hurried out of the library and retreating towards the east city gate. Breda, who was mixed in the crowd, looked calm. He was not flustered at all. He only raised his head to look at his surroundings from time to time, as if he was deep in thought. The silence of the sound transmission spell formation did not mean anything, but the reason behind this situation was enough to make one think. Due to the distance restriction of the spell formation, he had indeed set up many transfer points in various parts of the city. This method was to ensure that the communication was smooth and that military orders were conveyed. Secondly, it was to plant spies to monitor the situation. Now that all the sound transmission spell formations had suddenly gone silent, there was only one possibility. All the spies in the city had been unknowingly removed. Then, why did the other party do this? The other party, who had been passively taking a beating and bitterly holding on to stall time, could barely protect themselves. Was there a need to send out so few people to remove the spies in the city? Obviously, no matter how one looked at it, it was completely unnecessary. Unless the other party had greater ambitions. While passively defending, they still wanted to do something. In fact, the other party had done it. After nearly half an hour of encirclement, the situation in the city was still in a stalemate. This was enough for the other party to have the time to free up their hands and carry out other plans. And in the current situation, if there was a way to turn the situation around, it could only be capture the king. Breda, who was good at calculations, had already vaguely grasped the context of the other party's actions. All that was left was to wait and see. With this thought in mind, the speed of their advance suddenly slowed. The cavalry in front of them kept making noises. What's going on? Let's go take a look. Fitch was not stupid. After Breda suddenly changed his tone and hurriedly gave the order to retreat, he also realized something. His expression was serious as he stood guard around Breda. He immediately looked at the chaos in front of them and shouted in a deep voice. After a short while, the officer who went to investigate reported, "Sir, it's the nobles in the city. They're blocking the road and requesting to withdraw from Pious City with us." Now, Pious City was the territory of the Gray Coat Army. Although the Gray Coat Army soldiers didn't do anything to disturb the people after entering the city, under military discipline, even the nobles who couldn't stand the sight of them didn't interact with them. However, the nobles did not feel at ease because of this. They thought highly of themselves and felt that they were different from the commoners. The safety of their family's wealth, the issue of inheritance, and so on made them worry all day long. They were afraid that those gray-clothed mobs would come knocking on their door one day and burn, kill, and plunder the family capital that they were so proud of, or even directly destroy it. Therefore, after receiving the news that Blank's army was marching into the city, the nobles who were already living in the East District could not sit still anymore. They packed up their things and waited here, hoping that the Blank's army would take them to the hinterland of Bran. However, Fitch roared angrily, "Bastard, what kind of nobles are you? Who told you to stop? Order the frontline cavalry to open up a path. If there are any obstructions, kill them." Time was of the essence, and they didn't have the time to escape with this group of burdens. It would be a real tragedy if they were dragged down and surrounded. "Yes, sir." Looking at the officer who quickly turned around and ran back, Breda frowned. He opened his mouth to say something, but in the end, he did not say anything. Fitch's decision was not wrong, but his method was a little too harsh. In fact, he could have just sent a message and ordered the nobles to open up a path and follow behind them. This way, it would not delay their time, and it would not cause a possible backlash from the nobles. However, after thinking about it, Breda also felt that he was thinking too much. In front of this large group of elite heavy cavalry, how could those cowardly nobles dare to say anything? Sure enough, after the cavalry in front pulled out their swords and spears and put on a tough attacking posture, the nobles in the middle of the road hurriedly pushed to the sides of the road. Especially when some of the slower ones were mercilessly slaughtered by the cavalry with their swords, they cried for their fathers and mothers and retreated like a tide. The road was clear again, but when Bretta's army passed through the area where the nobles were seeing them off, there was a sudden burst of noise. "General, my lords, this is Viscount Bradley's family, Viscount Bradley's family. The Adelaide family sends our greetings to all of you, my lords. We beg you to save us. My family will repay you generously later. My family has been good friends with Branchie of the Military Armament Department for generations. General, you need us. You need us. Just one person. We just need to send one person out. I beg of you." All kinds of temptations came one after another. Some tempted with benefits, some moved with emotions. Families with good conditions offered all their benefits with both hands. Families with wide connections and good eyesight had connections with the Military Armament Department in the north, the Tiger Roar Legion, and so on. Some leaders of small families with neither strength nor status even pulled out their good-looking daughters and wives, hoping to use their beauty to move the high-ranking officers and generals who could make decisions. The short journey was an eye-opener for Bretta and the others. Their mouths twitched as they listened to all kinds of offers. However, whether they were tempted or not, they could not agree. After all, the so-called wealth, fame, and so on were just worldly possessions. If they lost their lives, everything would be meaningless. This could be seen from these sorrowful nobles, however, just as the impatient Bretta and the others automatically blocked the sound around them and urged their horses forward expressionlessly. Some of the desperate nobles began to curse as if they were venting their anger, provoking the angry nerves of the crowd. "Our family is finished. A family of hundreds of years is going to be ruined in our hands. Bullsh asterisk T. There are people hiding in front. This is F asterisk King unfair. Tiger Roar Legion. Is it the Tiger Roar Legion? Leaving us to die. F asterisk CK. Your family's 18 generations of direct daughters. They're laughing at us. F asterisk CK. Let's fight with them. If we can't live, they can't leave either. Murder. They don't save people, they kill people." No one knew who made the first move, but a big man in black who was covered in blood screamed and fell on his back. The scene suddenly became quiet. Everyone looked at the cavalryman, who kept waving his hand and waving his sword in denial with a panicked expression. "No, I didn't do anything. I really didn't do anything. He fell on his own. F asterisk CK? He died right in front of you. And you dare to lie? I saw you waving your sword and killing people with my own eyes. It was you. Be careful." Amidst the chaos and clamor, an iron crutch was suddenly tossed out from the crowd, and as luck would have it, it directly hit the forehead of the cavalryman whose face was flushed red, causing his body to sway with a bang. The cavalryman subconsciously touched his forehead and put it down. His palm was covered in blood. Roar! With a furious roar, the cavalryman's eyes instantly turned red. Without thinking, he waved his sword and dismounted from his horse, slashing at the nearest noble guard. Poof! The sword pierced into the guard's body cleanly, and blood spurted out. He pulled out his sword and slashed again, and blood spurted out again. After more than 10 slashes, the cavalryman looked up with his face covered in blood. He roared ferociously. "This is called murder. Bastards, do you see this? This is F asterisk King murder. Stop. Damn it." By the time Bretta turned his head and waved his hand to stop the cavalryman, it was already too late. He cursed helplessly and shouted decisively, "All cavalrymen, charge with your spears and kill." Before he finished his words, more roars and roars were heard continuously. F asterisk CK. "You didn't save him and killed him. Let's fight, let's fight." On both sides of the road, the angry crowd of nobles who felt that there was no hope to escape rushed to the middle of the cavalrymen like a flood. The two sides were instantly in a mess, and the scene was extremely chaotic for a moment. The nobles were not weak either. Those who were related to the nobles more or less knew some combat power and martial arts. Together with the guards and the private soldiers they secretly raised, their strength was quite impressive. Now that they had gone crazy, the situation was suddenly in a stalemate. Of course, this stalemate wouldn't last long. Elite heavy cavalry were indeed elite heavy cavalry. Even though there was a limit to how far they could charge, once they entered a true combat state, these stragglers wouldn't be able to contend against them. In this chaos, Fitch, who was slowly moving forward while protecting Bretta, suddenly turned his head and roared, "Who is it?" Chapter 926. Who's there? Fitch didn't discover the enemy, and it was hard to make a precise judgment in the crowd. He only felt a sharp killing intent coming from that direction, and immediately assumed a vigilant attack posture. There was no response, and no enemy jumped out to assassinate him. But the moment Fitch suddenly turned his head, a shining prismatic crystal was thrown out from the crowd behind him, landing above Bretta and Fitch's heads. "What's that?" This time, Bretta was the first to notice it. He subconsciously squinted his eyes and looked up. Then, with a soft bang, the prismatic crystal suddenly burst open, releasing a dazzling light. He screamed, "Ah, damn it! Glittering crystal!" In a short moment, Bretta, who had some understanding of magic and alchemy items, blurted out the true name of the prismatic crystal. Although he immediately lowered his head to dodge, he was still hit by the dazzling light. He only felt a burning pain in his eyes, and his vision was pale white. He could barely see anything around him. At this moment, a sudden roar came from beside his ear. "How dare you? There's an assassin. Protect the general." The next moment, a bright red light suddenly flashed in his white vision. That was the light of Fitch's fighting aura. Although he was in a dangerous situation, Bretta's expression didn't panic at all. He didn't make any unnecessary movements, and only sat on the horse's back, tightly holding the reins to control the panicking warhorse. This action seemed to be waiting for death, but it was actually the best choice to deal with the current crisis. After all, acting rashly after being suddenly blinded would not only be useless, it would also increase the difficulty of the guard around him. In an instant, loud bangs rang out. The wind brought by the overflowing fighting aura swept past him from time to time, whistling like ghosts. Faintly, he could even hear the sharp sound of crossbows being fired at close range. It was truly frightening. From these miscellaneous sounds, Bretta could more or less guess the situation he was facing now. A team of assassins with great teamwork was surrounding him and attacking him. Moreover, their strength wasn't weak and was quite troublesome. Otherwise, as an Earth Grade Master, Fitch wouldn't have called for people to protect him at the first moment. Thinking with a frown, Bretta's expression gradually turned grave. As expected, his analysis was correct. The opponent did have great ambitions. This time he had failed. The assassination was extremely sudden and ended very quickly. Fitch was an Earth-grade expert after all. If there were no accidents, he would have no problems sweeping the field. Since this group of assassins had chosen to move as a group, it meant that they didn't have absolute strength that surpassed Fitch's. As such, as long as the ambush failed to deliver a fatal blow, there was basically no chance of success. Since he had dodged in time, Bretta slowly regained his vision. He blinked and saw that not far away from him, Fitch was fighting fiercely with a burly man wielding a sword in a domineering manner. The two of them exchanged blows in the end. Fei Chi flew backwards in the air, while the tall and sturdy man seemed to have suffered a bit of a loss. He hugged his injured arm and fell into the chaotic crowd below. Roar! Surround him and kill him. Damn it, a bunch of trash. Fitch, who had retreated to Bretta's side, was afraid that he had been lured away, so he didn't dare to pursue. He could only roar helplessly as he watched the burly man slash apart the cavalryman beside him and rush into the chaotic crowd of nobles on the side of the road, disappearing in an instant. Forget it, they won't have a chance. Rubbing his still dry and stinging eyes, Bretta turned his head and watched the cavalryman at the front charge back to clear the crowd on both sides of the road and keep a safe distance. There were no traces of the soul-stirring assassination just now, as if it had never happened. He couldn't help but exhale slightly and wave his hand. He said in a low voice, "Let's retreat first and leave this city." You're injured?" Wiping away the blood at the corner of his mouth, Fitch's face was as dark as the bottom of a pot. He said hatefully, "Damn it, we've been set up." The last guy who attacked me was the burly man who pretended to be killed by our cavalrymen. He suddenly jumped up and attacked me when I wasn't paying attention. I suffered a bit from him. He paused and looked at the chaotic crowd on both sides of the road that was screaming and retreating. This group of idiots, they must have been incited by him to attack the army. Bretta couldn't help but start. He then laughed and shook his head. Haha, not a bad plan. Too bad they were a bit weak. Fitch nodded lightly when he heard this, but his expression was cautious. He had to admit that although the group of assassins who suddenly appeared were slightly weaker than him in terms of fighting aura, their entire set of assassination methods was enough to make one's heart jump. As an Earth-grade elite, Fitch couldn't even hold down a single one of them. He thought for a moment and said seriously, "General, I suggest that you immediately speed up and leave the city." Bretta wasn't surprised when he heard this. He nodded lightly and knew what Fitch was worried about. It should be known that the group of assassins who attacked just now was only a group of slightly weaker assassins. The mysterious expert who blocked over 1,000 elite cavalrymen in the 10-mile alley in the South City hadn't arrived yet. "All right, send the order. We'll go with the vanguard." "Ah, damn it, damn it, damn it." Bretta, who was nodding in agreement with Fitch's suggestion, tightened his grip on the reins. He felt something, and his body suddenly tensed up. He lowered his head and saw the scarlet blood seeping out between his fingers. He screamed like a young girl who had suddenly lost her virginity. His calm demeanor in the face of danger instantly disappeared. He took out a white towel from his sleeve and wiped it with a panicked expression. It was as if he wanted to wipe off a layer of skin on his palm. Of course, this blood wasn't Bretta's. It must have been accidentally splashed by someone in the chaotic battle just now. Sorry. I didn't pay attention when I was fighting just now." Fitch, who was familiar with his general's serious misophobia, couldn't help but scratch his head when he saw this. He said awkwardly, "Why don't I ask someone to get a basin of water for the general to clean up?" "Shoo-ay, shoo-ay, 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 my ass. Change horses. I'll ride your horse." Okay, he really changed horses? He loves cleanliness so much. What a pity. If I knew he had this problem, I wouldn't have gone through so much trouble. I could have just poured a bucket of feces on him. Maybe he would have killed himself. At the periphery of the chaotic crowd, a burly man covered in blood stains, who was also the burly man who died under the cavalry's blade and caused the chaos, saw Bretta screaming, wiping his hands, and changing his horse. He seemed to have realized something and said regretfully as he clapped his hands, "David, you're so disgusting." The gray-clothed youth at the side couldn't help but curl his lips in disgust when he heard this. He looked at the big man covered in blood and frowned. "Where are you hurt?" "I'm fine. My arm was swept by the combat aura and opened a small wound." Pause for a while. The big man followed the gray-clothed youth's gaze and looked down at the blood on his chest. He suddenly realized something and dipped his hand into the blood and put it into his mouth. "Oh, this ketchup. My hand was shaking, and I accidentally smeared too much. TSK, it tastes good. Want to try?" Needless to say, this was David and the other members of the Gray Space. According to the previous plan, they should first remove the spies in the city and then wait for Tang On to arrive to assassinate Bretta. The former was no problem. They could easily follow the clues and solve the problem. But the latter, shaking his head, David frowned and said, "The situation is not good. Bretta's nose is too sensitive. If we retreat now, Boss won't be able to catch up. There's nothing we can do about it. We tried our best. Who knew he had an Earth-grade master with him? What bad luck." The gray-clothed youth also shook his head helplessly. He looked a little depressed. They did try their best. Bretta's sudden order to retreat instantly disrupted the deployment here. Seeing that Tang wouldn't be able to make it in time, David and the others could only choose to assassinate by force. Although it was hasty, their plan was pretty good. What a clumsy plan. Looking at the city gate in front of him, Bretta had a bitter taste in his mouth. About half an hour ago, we led thousands of cavalrymen to break in through this gate, thinking that we could easily kill the leader of the rebels and get the information about the purple cannon. But now we are rushing out of this gate like a dog that has lost its home. We only want to get out of here as soon as possible. Haha, how ironic. General, please don't say that. No one would have thought that a warrior could fight against thousands of cavalrymen, right? This is just a coincidence. Looking around vigilantly, Fitch comforted him. Coincidence. Any seemingly accidental detail on the battlefield is enough to determine an inevitable result. Because of the failure of the most crucial point, the entire plan became meaningless. This inevitably made Breda, who always said that everything can be planned, a little depressed. He shook his head and followed the crowd out of the city gate. He looked back at the city wall of Pia City. We paid such a big price. If we miss this opportunity, it will be difficult to kill the leader of the rebels in the future. There will always be a chance. As long as the general is safe, the head of the Gray Coat Army will become another medal of the general sooner or later. After successfully getting out of the city, Fitch, who had been nervous all this time, couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief and flattered him with a smile. I hope so. After being a little depressed, Breda also knew that he wasn't in the right state as the general. He pulled himself together and was about to say something with a smile when he suddenly saw Fitch's expression change drastically. He instantly rushed over. Lower your head. Although it was only a few words, Breda's current position was at least 300 feet away from the city gate, because the warhorse under him had been galloping at high speed without stopping for a rest. No matter how one looked at it, this was a distance that was enough to ensure their safety. However, it just so happened that at such a distance, the moment Breda and Fitch relaxed their minds, an arrow pierced through the air accurately and whistled into their ears. The horse's hooves thundered. Even Fitch hadn't been able to detect the arrow in time in such an environment, let alone Breda. He simply lowered his head subconsciously when he heard Fitch's words. Then, Breda's body swayed slightly when Fitch suddenly pressed down on his shoulder. A bone-chilling wind instantly swept over his head, and a round object flew out along with a few decorative red feathers. It wasn't a head. Although it did look like one from afar, it was just a helmet. Of course, if Breda hadn't lowered his head and Fitch hadn't pressed down on his shoulder, he would probably end up like the cavalryman in front of them. Bang! There was a crisp sound like a popping melon. The arrow flew past Breda and hit the back of the cavalryman's head. It instantly pierced through the iron helmet and spun into the cavalryman's brain before exploding and splashing red and white. F***CK? On the battlements of Piax City, Luke narrowed his eyes and punched the brick wall with a regretful expression on his face. This was his best and last chance, but he had not succeeded. To be honest, with the Earth-grade expert Fei Chi protecting him from the side, it was indeed too difficult for him to succeed with a single arrow. Being able to reach this stage was already not easy. But no matter how many subjective and objective factors there were, a failure was a failure. Luke couldn't help but feel regretful. But at this moment, pleasant laughter suddenly rang out next to his ears. Well done. He raised his head and saw a figure rushing past him like a gust of wind. The figure kicked off the battlements and leapt into the air. Boss. Luke was greatly alarmed. He subconsciously stretched out his hand to grab at the figure, but naturally he missed. Jumping over the wall to commit suicide? It was no wonder that Luke was so shocked. It was true that Piax City was a small city, but the city walls were at least 50 meters high. If he jumped down like that, wouldn't he be seriously injured even if he didn't die? Before Luke could try to understand Twain's intentions, a scene in the distance suddenly entered his eyes. He opened his mouth, a blank expression on his face. In the distance, Breda didn't take the opportunity to ride away. Instead, for some reason, he got off his horse and landed behind the cavalry formation. He jumped and shouted as he rolled around, as if he was trying hard to wipe something off his body. There were faint, hysterical screams in the wind. What was going on? With his head full of question marks, Luke narrowed his eyes. His innate vision allowed him to quickly see what was on Breda's body: the red blood and the gray, sticky substance. He instantly understood that Breda had probably been drenched by the arrows that had blown up the heads of the cavalrymen in front of him and couldn't dodge in time. But was there a problem with that? Was he scared of blood? How was that possible? He was a general who had seen the battlefield of Kakwa, after all. Of course, Bretta wasn't scared of blood, but he had a more serious problem. He was obsessed with cleanliness. In his eyes, this person whose face was covered in blood and brain matter was probably even more terrifying than the legendary evil dragons. Fitch was naturally familiar with his general's problem. He knew that things weren't good when he saw the cavalryman's head explode. But he couldn't do anything when the cavalryman charged over. He could only watch as Bretta rode his horse through the curtain of blood. Then, he screamed like a fish that had fallen into a pot of oil. He suddenly jumped up and rolled off his horse without any suspense. Fortunately, he had jumped high enough due to the stimulation. Otherwise, he might have been trampled to death by the cavalryman behind him. That would have been a real shame. When Fitch also flew over the cavalryman and landed not far away from Bretta, he raised his head and saw the figure who had jumped high on the city wall in the distance. His expression froze. Although he hadn't seen the person from beginning to end, the huge alarm in his heart was clearly telling him that the mysterious expert who had withstood more than 1,000 elite cavalrymen in 10 Mile Alley was here. Fortunately, the distance wasn't short. There was still time and a chance to escape. Of course, Fitch didn't think that the person would die from this height. But after roughly estimating the distance between them, he couldn't help but feel slightly relieved. He quickly walked to Bretta's side, gritted his teeth, bent over and waved his fist. "Excuse me, General." It was impossible for Bretta to listen to anything right now. Even his calculated brain was probably empty. So, Fitch decisively made the decision to knock him out and carry him away. But before he waved his fist, suddenly, a puzzled voice sounded clearly in his ears. "Excuse me, what's wrong with him? Is he obsessed with cleanliness? Could it be, the legendary Virgo?" His body stiffened, and his fist hovered above Bretta's head. "How could it be? So fast? P.S. I don't have any prejudice against Virgo. I'm just joking. If I accidentally hurt him, I apologize in advance." Chapter 9:27. Excuse me, but what's wrong with him? Is he obsessed with cleanliness? Could it be, the legendary Virgo? At that moment, Fitch's body was so tense that even his mind was frozen. The only thought left in his mind was shock. When did the guy get to him? How could he be so fast? Also, it wasn't a matter of speed at all. When he bent down, the guy was still floating in the air. How could he have crossed the distance of hundreds of meters in an instant? In fact, it wasn't just Fitch. Even Luke, who had been watching from the city wall and was faintly worried, didn't know what had happened just now. He only saw Tang leap into the empty sky with the momentum of his leap. Then, when he was about to fall, he suddenly disappeared from the sky and arrived next to Bretta in an instant. The whole process was so simple. As for the distance of hundreds of meters between them, it was as if it had never existed. Could it be that the boss also practiced spatial magic? That was what Luke thought, dumbfounded. However, no matter what method he used, Fitch didn't have time to think about it. He only knew that the mysterious expert was right next to him, and he was completely defenseless. He even exposed his back to the enemy. There was no way he could escape. Of course, it was impossible for him to just wait for death. It was too late to dodge. Also, Bretta was rolling back and forth under his feet. Fitch couldn't dodge. He came back to his senses in an instant. Without thinking, he forcefully twisted his waist and turned around. In a hurry, he used all his strength to wrap his palm in a fighting aura and threw a punch. Unfortunately, before he could fully extend his arm, he hurriedly withdrew his fist and bent his arm again to block the hand that was grabbing him from above. Their wrists collided with a soft bang. There wasn't as much force as he had imagined. Crap! A feint! Fitch's heart instantly sank. As expected, an open hand easily bypassed his arms and pressed down on his face. Boom! Dirt splashed and the ground trembled. Fitch's head and a small part of his upper body instantly sank into the ground. Drums, gongs, and bugles seemed to be ringing in his ears at the same time. His head was buzzing. His erratic gaze finally saw the appearance of this mysterious expert for the first time. He was a middle-aged man with white hair at his temples. His expression was one of unconcealable tiredness. His clothes were wrinkled, making him look like he was in a sorry state. In some places, there were even cuts made by sharp blades. However, the large and small bloodstains on his clothes did not seem to be his own. It was clear that it was not easy for him to withstand the encirclement of more than 1,000 elite cavalrymen. However, that was all there was to it. The fact that the other party was able to arrive in time under such circumstances was sufficient to cause others to be horrified. Removing his palm, Tang didn't hesitate at all. His left fist, which had been accumulating power and waiting for an opportune moment, was raised high into the air. It was extremely powerful and beautiful. Then, accompanied by the sound of wind and thunder, it suddenly smashed down towards Fei Qi's temple. From a certain point of view, the human body was fragile, and this had nothing to do with external strength. A small fry and a Do Qi master had their hearts pierced by a sharp blade at the same time. The latter might not be able to hold on longer than the former. Either way, they would die. It was precisely because of this reason that most martial arts schools had fatal attacks that targeted the vital points. Many seemingly inconceivable examples of the weak defeating the strong came from this. For example, the so-called death fist of a Japanese ninja in the modern world. Actually, to put it bluntly, it was to mobilize the strength of the entire body and violently explode in an instant to deliver a fatal blow to the vital points. And right now, Tang's strength was already much higher than Fei Qi's. Now that he had aimed for the vital points and smashed down with his fist without any interference, it was as good as determining life and death. His feet trembled again, and a stream of blood mixed with grayish-white substances instantly sprayed out from the ground like a small fountain. As an Earth Stage master, Fei Qi only took one punch from beginning to end, and his little life was almost gone. He was on the verge of death. Stepping back, Tang indifferently lowered his head. He saw that Fei Qi's eyes, which were covered in blood, carried unconcealable despair and shock, as well as even more confusion and bewilderment. Seeming to have understood the meaning of this gaze, he paused and calmly said, "All right, there's no harm in telling you. It's permitha teleportation." That's right. The reason why Tang could come over so quickly just now was precisely because of this permitha teleportation skill. The system upgrade not long ago gave Tang a total of 2 skills, Frenzied Feast and permitha teleportation. Compared to the former, which was like a mirage, Tang, who already had some understanding of space, was the first to master the latter, which was the movement skill, permitha teleportation. Permitha teleportation. Between the permitha, the boundary of life and death. This time, the old butler didn't blindly fool Tang. This skill was, as the literal meaning of the description, simple and easy to understand. This case, the permitha, as long as one could unexpectedly travel from his case to the permitha, it would be equivalent to crossing the boundary between life and death. Right now, Fei Qi, who was only exhaling and not inhaling, was the most obvious example. To put it bluntly, according to the characteristics of the other world, if a martial artist knew space magic, then no one would be able to stop him. Of course, Fei Qi wouldn't understand the meaning of the system skill, permitha teleportation, nor did he need to understand. All he needed was an explanation, and then he would swallow his last breath with a look of realization. At least he didn't become a confused ghost. After easily finishing off Fei Qi, Tang glanced at the cavalry guards who had turned their horses around and were charging at him. He shook his head slightly and walked over to Bretta, who was rolling around, and lowered his head to look at him with a frown. Bretta still didn't seem to be aware of his current situation, nor did he see the silent and motionless Fei Qi not far away. He was still rolling back and forth, tearing at his armor and outer clothes. His upper and lower lips trembled nervously as he muttered to himself, "Dirty, dirty, dirty! This dusty, filthy world. Get out! All of you get out of my way! I want water, water! Oh, that's sorry. What do you want to say?" After listening for a while, Tang In rubbed his nose, feeling more and more confused. He thought for a while and said directly, "All right, although I didn't count accurately just now, I've killed roughly a few hundred of your subordinates, yes, and some assassins. Based on what you said earlier, I should be a qualified villain, right? Am I qualified to kill you? Filthy thing. Take it all off." Curled up like a prawn, Bretta clearly didn't hear Tang Un's declaration of slaughter. He was still trembling at a high frequency. Stumped for a moment, Tang In touched his forehead and sighed helplessly. "Please, can you not be like this? This is far from what I imagined. It wasn't easy to catch up with you. I don't expect you to fight back, but you should at least try to resist a little." That was the truth. Not only was there a limit to human strength, it was also dangerous and arduous to run around in the middle of a 10-kilometer alley. Bretta's decisive retreat had almost made all of Tang In's efforts go down the drain. It could be said that if it weren't for the fact that he had managed to force Bretta off his horse, Tang In really wouldn't have been able to kill Bretta this time. He had worked so hard to catch up with the main character, but in the end, things had turned out like this. How could Tang In accept this? It was like clearing a dungeon. After spending a lot of effort to find a guide and clear the mobs, after going through untold hardships and trekking through mountains and rivers, he finally arrived in front of the big boss. In the end, he discovered that the boss was trash and couldn't even compare to the mobs. Wasn't this a scam? He didn't feel any sense of accomplishment at all. Forget it. Who am I working hard for? Shaking his head helplessly, Tang In bent down and pressed down on Bretta's rolling body with his left hand. He then stretched out his right hand and grabbed Bretta's neck with his fingers like a claw. As if sensing the undisguised, killing intent, the crazy Bretta finally came to his senses. He looked at Tang In blankly, and his eyes gradually became clear. He opened his mouth and said, "You are. Heh, I lost this time, but you won't live for long either." Tang In scratched his head and said, "Actually, you can say something better. I've heard too many of these street gangster words." Ha! You don't know. You will never know what kind of terrifying existence you have offended. Huh. Tang In frowned and thought for a while. He shook his head regretfully and said, "Sigh, I still can't communicate normally." Then, "Goodbye, General Bretta." As soon as he finished speaking, he tightened his grip. The sound of the throat bone breaking was always so crisp and pleasant. Bretta, whose face was full of panic, finally didn't have to worry about the filth all over his body. He closed his eyes briskly, and there was a faint sense of joy. Pouting, Tang In was even more unhappy when he saw this. He felt that he had helped the other party. What the hell was this? Stop. Kill this bastard and avenge the general. Bretta himself didn't have any complaints, but the cavalry guards who rushed over immediately went berserk. They waved their swords crazily and urged their horses to kill with their eyes wide open. After getting rid of the main character, Tang In naturally lost his interest in slaughtering. He turned around and narrowed his eyes at the walls of Pia's city, silently sensing something. Die. The moment the cavalry rushed up to him and waved their swords, he suddenly disappeared on the spot. Then, he flashed more than 200 feet away. When he reappeared, he was already on the city wall next to Luke. Whoa, boss. Luke was also shocked by Tang Un's ghostly appearance. He only recognized him when he turned his hand and revealed his dagger. Waving his hand, Tang In simply said, "Gather everyone. Let's go." Go where? Tang In rolled his eyes and said, "Nonsense, what do you think? After taking advantage of others, of course we're going to run." Bretta was the main general of the army. Now that he was killed, the thousands of cavalry without a leader were likely to choose revenge. And now, the reinforcement from the Gray Coat army were only 1,000 cavalry that had been temporarily put together. Naturally, they were no match for them. So, the most important thing now was to run. Of course, if these thousands of cavalry really ignored everything and chased after them, Tang In was confident that he could completely stop them. After all, the reinforcements from the Gray Coat army were about to arrive. Oh, understood. Seeing that Tang In seemed to be in a bad mood, Luke simply flipped over and jumped off the city wall. Tang paused and turned to look at the place where Bretta died. He frowned slightly. He had offended a terrifying existence, the Brand's court, the Temple of Light. Or was it just a simple threat? Forget it. He had already offended everyone he could offend. Adding another one didn't matter. After Bretta's plan failed and he died outside Pia City, the chaos within 100 miles finally subsided. Tang's plan to completely stop the thousands of cavalry didn't succeed. After all, they were a regular army with strict military discipline. Unlike the Gray Coat Army, even if Bretta died in battle, there were still senior officers like the Deputy General to take charge of the situation. Logically, they led the thousands of cavalry out of the encirclement before the Gray Coat Army could encircle them. At this point, this plan to capture Josiah ended with the failure of Blank's army. Following that, the Brand's court's assassination mission against Josiah also failed. In the Battle of 10 Mile Alley, Tang, who had gone on a killing spree, was like a demon. Blood and corpses were practically all over the alley. It wasn't just the cavalry. There were also the assassins who wanted to fish in troubled waters. Although the former lost hundreds of people, at least they weren't completely wiped out. The latter, on the other hand, was more miserable, because there were people everywhere there was nowhere to hide. Later on, Twain chased after the assassins and massacred them. Almost all of the assassins who had entered the 10 Mile Alley were left there. This action had undoubtedly completely deterred the assassins who were ready to make a move in the dark. In fact, these assassins originally had two choices. One was to accept the mission to assassinate Josiah from the official guild and obtain various martial arts techniques. The other was to accept the mission to assassinate the Brand's military officers from the assassin organization and obtain the secret method to increase the cultivation speed of combat power. According to the benefits, the latter was undoubtedly more attractive. But don't forget, the danger level of the two targets was not at the same level, and not all assassins had the courage to seek riches and danger. Compared to offending the Brand's court in the Brand's territory, the Gray Coat Army was undoubtedly easier to bully. This was a main reason why there were so many assassins around Josiah. However, after the battle at 10 Mile Alley, the situation was different. Those assassins who had originally wanted to take advantage of the situation realized that they weren't picking on soft persimmons, but had instead kicked an iron plate. Moreover, it was the kind with barbs and thorns. They instantly panicked, feeling that this mission wasn't worth the loss. It was safer to pack up and leave. The departure of the assassins had undoubtedly ensured Joshua's safety, and Tang was able to free up his hands and put the trip to the southern capital on the agenda. Of course, before that, Tang, who boasted that he was born to be busy, still had to do something. In the evening, in a large city in Brand's hinterland, where the three armies of Bretta, Baylor, and Gary had gathered, the streets in the city were still deserted, and there was almost no one in sight from afar. Moreover, as the winter became thicker, the biting cold night wind came out early and wreaked havoc on everything, adding a sense of desolation to this deserted city. Not here yet. On a remote street, a group of cavalrymen moved slowly. The burly Baylor raised his head to look at the young soldier leading the way in front and asked with a frown. From the style of his armor, this young soldier was obviously not from the same army as Baylor and the rest. Looking at the dancing flame patterns on the young soldier's shoulder armor, one could tell that he was a soldier from the Blue Flame Army. The young soldier turned around and bowed as he replied respectfully, "General, please be patient. The place that my master has arranged is at the end of this street." Pretending to be mysterious. "Even if I used my butt to guess, I would know that the wolf cub is up to no good." Baylor snorted coldly and pouted. The so-called wolf cub was naturally the general of the Blue Flame Army, Gary, who was known as the Blue Wolf of the North. Since this concerned his general, the young soldier obviously could not say anything. He could only lead the way and pretend that he did not hear anything. Baylor did not expect this young soldier to reply. He was only leading the way, so he probably did not know anything. Of course, Baylor naturally had some guesses as to why Gary had suddenly sent someone to invite him and even found such a remote place. Yes, it should be to discuss where the two of them, who had led reinforcement from the front lines, should go after Bretta's death. He really did not expect that arrogant rooster to die just like that. When did the Grey Coat Army produce such a top-notch expert? It had to be said that although Baylor did not have a good impression of Bretta, his heart could not help but waver after hearing the news of his death. He felt that it was a pity. Baylor, who had been in the army for most of his life, naturally knew that Bretta was not some nobody. In fact, he was very famous. Putting aside his eccentricities, it would not be too much to call him a famous general. Among the generals that the Tiger Roar Army had, he was the first to bear the brunt. Baylor and Gary had been puzzled when they had found out that he was the one who had been deployed by the Tiger Roar Army to encircle and annihilate the Grey Coat Army. They had only thought that the military armament department was determined to get rid of the Grey Coat Army, which was a huge threat to them. Who would have thought that as soon as they took over this mission and made their first deployment, not only would they lose soldiers and generals, but Bretta's body would also be carried back. It was unavoidable for a general to die in battle. Baylor, who was also a general of the brand, could not help but feel sorrowful. He shook his head and threw away the thoughts about Bretta in his mind. He guessed the purpose of Gary's invitation this time. To be honest, it was not difficult to guess. At least, that was what Baylor thought. The Tiger Roar Army, which had led this operation, had lost a general. They would not be able to recover in a short period of time. As a result, the two of them, who were outsiders, were in an awkward position. If they acted alone, they would definitely not be able to defeat the Grey Coat Army. If they joined forces, forget it. He was alone and did not have any ideas. If that Gary still wanted to make a difference, he would help if he could. It would be easier for him to explain when he returned. Sigh. At this point, perhaps I should really consider taking off my armor and going into seclusion to prevent further disgrace. Thinking about his own situation, Baylor could not help but feel a little dispirited. Actually, as a high-ranking general, his age was the time for him to display his abilities and make a difference. However, he did not have the strength. The external interference was too strong. As a result, the northern wilderness tribes on the front lines were constantly moving. As a general of the Thunderbolts Army, he had been ordered to come back and annihilate the Grey Coat Army. Furthermore, he only had a pitiful 2,000 cavalrymen with him. Of course, although he was depressed, Baylor definitely did not have any regrets. He knew that the reason why he was being suppressed was because he was too close to the Grey Coat Army. Or more accurately, it was because he had a close relationship with the Grey Coat Army's rebel general, Fry. A captain was a captain. After wasting so many years, he could still become a general. It was a pity that we could not fight side by side. We could only fight for our own masters on the battlefield. Thinking about this, Baylor grinned. His mood suddenly became much better. At this moment, the young soldier who was leading the way pulled on the reins and dismounted from his horse. He made an inviting gesture toward the small tavern by the road. "General, we are here." Chapter 928. General, we're here. After coming back to his senses, Baylor did not immediately get down from his horse. Instead, he raised his eyes and sized up this small tavern that was still open for business. Then, he turned his head and swept his gaze over the cold and desolate environment around him. He frowned slightly and finally cast his scrutinizing gaze at this young soldier. As if he knew what Baylor was thinking, the young soldier was even more respectful. This conversation is extremely important. To prevent too many people from looking, a general did not come out to welcome us. Please don't take offense. Baylor nodded his head non-committally to indicate that he understood. His expression did not change at all. On the other hand, the guards at the side urged their horses forward and looked at the young soldier warily. They got closer and said in a low voice, "General, be careful. Something is not right here." They were all elite soldiers who had fought through mountains of corpses and seas of blood. They only needed to look at their surroundings to sense that the atmosphere here was strange. However, Baylor did not express anything when he heard this. He looked deeply at the young soldier who still had a respectful expression and got off his horse. He waved his hand and said, "Lead the way." Since he had been careless and had been lured here, he might as well go in and see what the other party wanted. Furthermore, The surroundings might seem cold and quiet, and he could not see anyone at a glance. However, since it was a trap, Baylor did not think that he could easily charge out with the 100 or so cavalrymen on his side. They got off their horses. With just a hand gesture, the 100 or so cavalrymen tacitly split into two teams. One team stayed outside and looked for an opportunity to investigate the surrounding environment. At the very least, they would know where to break out in the event of a conflict. The other team pressed down on the hilt of their swords and followed closely behind Baylor. It was obvious that they wanted to enter the small tavern together. Honestly speaking, this did not conform to the rules. If it was really Gary inside, this would be overstepping their status and could be said to be disrespectful. However, the young soldier acted as if he did not see anything. It was as if he did not understand the intentions of these 50 cavalrymen. He had a faint smile on his face and continued to lead the way with a respectful expression. From the outside, one could tell that this small tavern was not too big. After passing through two wooden doors, one would arrive at the reception hall. Baylor's expression was still calm. After all, he was a ferocious person who had seen the Chiqua battlefield. Furthermore, if there was a need, even if he knew that it was a dragon's pool or a tiger's den, he would still charge in. However, after stepping through the door of the tavern, Baylor's footsteps suddenly stopped. He looked at the things in the hall in a daze. His expression was puzzled at first, and then it was unconcealable shock. Stunned, he raised his hand and gestured to the vigilant cavalry behind him to stop. Retreat. Without my order, no one is allowed to enter. General, retreat. Yes. After waiting for these worried and unwilling 50 cavalrymen to leave the tavern completely, Baylor took a deep breath and looked at the young man standing beside the only wooden table in the hall with a smile. He narrowed his eyes and strode forward. If I remember correctly, you're the first person on the wanted list of the various guilds. You're also the target of my Blank's army's encirclement and annihilation of the Gray Coat army this time. Your Excellency Tang In, right? With a self-deprecating laugh, Tang In stepped forward to welcome him. Long time no see. I didn't expect Brother Baylor to still remember me. Of course, Baylor would not forget Tang In. The first time he came to annihilate the Gray Coat army, he had directly failed because of Tang In. Not long ago, when they worked together to resist the barbarians in the northern wilderness at the front lines, their friendship was not shallow because of Fry. Of course, because a certain person's common face really could not be remembered, Baylor was also puzzled before confirming it. Then he ordered his personal cavalry to leave the tavern a few steps away. Tang In stopped and bowed simply. Then he smiled easily and said, "However, shouldn't your must-kill target be Josiah this time? Of course, Josiah is also your target, but you're more special." Baylor said expressionlessly, "You should know that other than the military, there's also the Temple of Light who's after you." Tang In touched his nose. "So, I'm a little famous?" He took a step forward. The atmosphere was solemn, and Baylor's eyes flashed. "Not only that, if I can take your head and use it as a military achievement, even if I don't achieve meteoric success in the future, it won't be a problem for me to have a meteoric rise in the short term." Spreading out his hands, Tang In pointed at the simple wine on the wooden table behind him. "If that's the case, then before you take my head, how about we have a glass of wine to celebrate our farewell?" I'll think about it." Ha! Seeing Tang In raise his head and laugh loudly, Baylor finally could not hold it in anymore. He also laughed boldly, and the tense atmosphere in the hall was instantly swept away. Seeing Tang In in this large city, which could be considered the command center of Blank's army in the short term, was undoubtedly greatly beyond Baylor's expectations. However, given their close relationship, even if he knew that Roland's actions were akin to walking into a trap, Baylor would not do something so immoral as to attack upon meeting him. Taking a step back, even if he wanted to attack, he would not lack the time to drink this wine. Outside the hall, the young soldier guarding the door of the tavern couldn't help but twitch the corners of his mouth when he heard this. In his heart, he thought that not only was his boss not a qualified messenger, he was also an unqualified lobbyist. How could he make such a mistake in inciting rebellion? In any case, Baylor was a famous general of one of the three frontline armies. Was it really good to casually ask him to give up his great future and turn to the great cause of rebellion with no bright future? He didn't know whether it was good or not, but Baylor didn't have any special reaction when he heard this. In reality, even if there was a sudden clap of thunder in his ears right now, Baylor wouldn't pay attention to it. All his attention was on the few pieces of letter paper. Excitement, frustration, nostalgia. His expression changed unpredictably like the wind and the clouds, and was extremely complicated. The letter was indeed written by Fry, Thin Monkey, Big Bear, and the other old brothers of the original Lance array-breaking team. Just as Tang had expected, the contents of the letter indeed didn't have any moving words. In reality, there wasn't even any intention of inciting rebellion or persuading them to surrender. There was only reminiscing about the wonderful times when the old brothers were all-powerful, as well as reminiscing about some of the old brothers who had passed away. There were some things that really didn't need to be said clearly. Firstly, there was no need. Secondly, it would hurt feelings. Of course, Fry and the others really hoped that Baylor would join the Gray Coat Army. This group of old brothers would be able to reunite, fight side by side again, and laugh proudly on the battlefield. But this was just their wish. They respected Baylor's thoughts more. Their many years of life-and-death friendship made it so that they wouldn't be as utilitarian as Josiah and Tang Yin, who would directly and openly incite rebellion, thinking that this would increase the strength of the Gray Coat Army. What they thought was that regardless of whether this matter succeeded or not, they hoped that it wouldn't make things difficult for Baylor. After all, circumstances had changed with the passage of time. Baylor was no longer the ordinary soldier nicknamed Lunatic in the Lance array-breaking battle team. He was now a high-ranking general in the main army. He had his own future, as well as other fetters, and so on. It was undoubtedly unrealistic to think that he could leave as he pleased in the past. Of course, Tang didn't have such a deep relationship with Baylor. Thus, when he saw Baylor lower his head and finish flipping through a few letters, he started to carry out his mission as a lobbyist. "I'm sorry. I was in too much of a hurry when I heard that Brother Baylor was coming over this time. Thus, without informing you, I've already sent Harry to your house some time ago. You know that I don't have any other intentions. No matter what decision Brother Baylor makes in the end, I will guarantee that your family will always be safe." Inciting a general of a regular army was not a small matter. It wasn't as simple as directly pulling someone over. Long before this thought had occurred to him, Tang had already made preparations. If Baylor was willing to join the Gray Coat Army, his family would naturally have to be relocated as soon as possible to prevent further retaliation. If Baylor was unwilling, Tang would send Baylor's family back safely and treat it as if this had never happened. Baylor shook his head slightly. He didn't misunderstand when he heard this. His fingertips gently caressed the paper, and his expression was obviously hesitant and conflicted. Seeing this, Tang continued, "I understand what Brother Fry and the rest mean. They want you to make your own choice. I respect their wishes. However, at the same time, I really feel that Brother Baylor should consider it carefully. It's not because of Brother Fry and the rest, but because of your current situation. Although it's a little shameless to say this, it's true that you're in this situation because of us. However, it's true that your current situation isn't good, right?" Baylor shook his head and laughed bitterly. "You know this too? Haha, it seems like I'm really down and out. You can't say that. The main thing is that Brother Baylor's 2,000 cavalrymen are too different from the 10,000 soldiers from the Blue Flame Army. Anyone can tell that something is wrong." "That's true." Baylor nodded his head in understanding. Furthermore, although the trigger for Brother Frey's incident back then was that retarded aristocrat, there was no way he could have done it. However, if there weren't any jealous villains who instigated him, how could such a dangerous military order be given to you so easily? Aren't you worried that you'll be stabbed in the back if you fight alongside a bunch of villains who framed Brother Fry? Baylor frowned. "Do you have evidence?" "Evidence? Ha!" Tang chuckled disapprovingly and said, I still remember that Brother Fry killed someone called Winard at the Zechen Legion's defense zone. Wasn't he one of the villains who framed you in the Thunderbolt's army back then? Furthermore, you can only bring 2,000 cavalrymen to participate in the encirclement. Don't blame me for being too straightforward. This is clearly the rhythm of using someone else to do your dirty work. Baylor was stunned. He looked at Tang, In, and suddenly grinned. Haha, I admit that at least you're a good lobbyist. Have I been seen through? Is it that obvious? Tang, In rubbed his nose and smiled as well. Fine, I'm here to instigate a rebellion. There's no point in being a regular army. Come and rebel with us. How exciting is that? Eat meat and drink wine. Also, the frontline army isn't allowed to bring women along, unlike our gray coat army. We have family members with us wherever we go, and we don't have to hold back when we need them. Even if you're injured and enter the casualty camp, the moment you lift the curtain, whoa, there are young women who take care of you. It's a complete seduction. I guarantee that you'll be injured a second time. He, chuckling, Tang gave a look that all men understood. He wanted to say something, but hesitated. It was extraordinarily seductive. Luke, who was standing next to the door, rubbed his forehead when he heard that. He couldn't bear to look at it at all. Boss, are you sure you're here to be a lobbyist and not pimp? Moreover, your realm of lying through your teeth is too deep. There are women in the casualty barracks who are willing to help, but they're all Andes, okay? Where did the seduction of uniforms come from? They were all boorish men, so Baylor didn't feel awkward when he heard that. He nodded and smiled. It sounds really good. Of course it's fine. Tang and drew a big picture with empty words. He patted his chest and asked, how about it? Are you tempted? Do you want to consider it? It's indeed worth considering. Rubbing his chin, Baylor seemed to be deep in thought. Of course, he wasn't thinking about the seduction of a uniform. That was just a joke to ease the atmosphere so that there wouldn't be an awkward silence after a tactful rejection. A moment later, Baylor suddenly clenched his fists. He raised his bowl of wine and downed it, as if he had already made a decision. But when he met Tang Un's eager gaze, he didn't answer directly. Instead, he pointed in the direction of the tavern's door and said with a smile, If I refuse, I won't be able to walk out of here today, right? Big Brother Baylor, you must be joking. Tang Un laughed and shook his head. He couldn't help but feel slightly excited because things seemed to be developing in a good direction. He spread his hands and said, Let's not talk about our friendship. If I really hurt you, Big Brother Fry would lead Skinny Monkey and the other brothers to hunt me down for thousands of miles. He paused for a moment. Of course, if Big Brother Baylor really wants to refuse, please give me some time to drink some wine. For the sake of this wine, please stay for a few dozen minutes so that this little brother can leave the city and escape. Baylor raised his head and laughed. He slapped the table and waved his hand. Okay, that's not a problem. You can escape now. Tang In was stunned at first. Then he was shocked. He couldn't help but feel regretful. Wasn't the subtext of asking him to escape a failure to instigate a rebellion? At this moment, Baylor suddenly said slowly, Of course, you have to bring me along. Damn it. I've had enough of being a general who's frustrated. I don't care who I am. It's still better to be with Captain and the others. F***CK. Big Brother Baylor, you don't have to take such a deep breath. Tang In rubbed his forehead and complained. However, he couldn't hide the ecstasy on his face. He felt relieved and raised his wine bowl. Come, cheers. Take it as a celebration for Big Brother Baylor joining the Gray Coat Army. Wait, Baylor pressed down on his wine bowl and said seriously, You can join the Gray Coat Army, but there are a few conditions. No problem at all. Isn't it just a few conditions? Big Brother, just say the word. I'll go all out. Are you thinking of seducing me with a uniform? No problem. Say it. Do you want to break an arm or a leg? I promise that I'll settle it for you properly. When we go back, I'll send you to the wounded barracks. F***CK. Baylor realized that he had seriously underestimated Tang Un's bottom line. He couldn't take it anymore and said with a bitter smile, Don't joke around. My relationship with your sister-in-law is still very good. Cough, cough. This isn't the main point. Yes, The first condition is to ensure the safety of my family. I owe them a lot and can't let anything happen to them. The second condition is that I'm the only one who will join the Gray Coat Army. It doesn't include anyone else. Pause for a while and pointed outside the door. The 2,000 cavalrymen outside the house, although they are my personal guards and completely listen to my orders, they all have families. I have a way out. It doesn't matter if they betray me, but they can't. Please understand this. The third condition is that after all, I've fought for the brand for most of my life. Let's part on good terms. Therefore, I hope that before I arrive at the Gray Coat Army's base, I won't interfere with the battle between you and the brand. For example, I won't help you attack this city from the inside and the outside. Yes, that's all. When Tang Yin heard this, he nodded and agreed without hesitation. Okay, no problem. I can agree to these 3 conditions of yours right now. That's it then. This matter shouldn't be delayed. Wait for me to go back and explain things, then I'll leave the city with you. Baylor was a decisive person. Since he had made up his mind, he didn't think about anything else. He got up and was about to go out and make arrangements. Wait. This time, it was Tang Yin's turn to call out to Baylor. He smiled mysteriously and said, Big brother, are you planning to go to the Gray Coat Army's base alone? HM? Baylor was instantly shocked when he heard this. Didn't I just say that it's just me and that I won't implicate anyone else? Big brother, you've misunderstood. Tang Yin waved his hand and said, since Big Brother has decided to join the Gray Coat Army, in order to not waste your military talent, of course, we hope that you can come and fight immediately. Therefore, Big Brother, you still need a proof of your allegiance. Proof? Proof of what? Oh, to put it simply, you need to give everyone a proof that they believe in you. Don't worry, Big Brother, you don't have to worry about this. I've already sent people to do it. The same excuse to invite Gary over for a chat. This shouldn't go against Big Brother's conditions, right? Chapter 929. Brand South. If one only looked at the division of power, this Shiza continent, which only had the Bran and the northern wilderness, didn't feel that vast. However, if one looked at it from the perspective of backward transportation and information transmission, this continent was surprisingly large. It was so large that the North was in a state of war because of a sudden disaster. On the other hand, the South was still as peaceful as ever. At most, the citizens would gossip about the news about the Gray Coat Army in the newspapers. They would either comment on it, sigh with emotion, or mock it. Then they would go home to eat, and beat up the naughty kids. Everything went on as usual. As for the war, turmoil, and displacement, what did this have to do with their comfortable life? Yes, this phenomenon was indeed strange. The North and the South were separated like 2 countries that didn't interact with each other. But this was the overall situation of the brand. Not only were the customs and other subjective things, even the objective terrain and climate seemed to follow this law. When the bone-chilling north wind blew to the south, especially the capital of the South, it became warm and gentle. It didn't have the cold temperament that winter should have. However, more than 10 miles outside the capital of the brand, beside the pond behind Wu Ding's small house, although the wind that wasn't cold at the high altitude had become gentle, the atmosphere here was a bit stiff and cold because of the angry words. If that's the case, then that fellow has taken out the secret mental cultivation method that increases the cultivation speed of Doqi again. How shameless. I found it strange back then. Such a secret technique, even if it has flaws, why would he cooperate with us like this? So he knew that the Gray Coat Army was going to come out, so he used this delaying tactic. Master, you're too kind. You should have killed this despicable person back then. With a gloomy face, Winston clenched his fist and said angrily. On the side, Wu Ding and Haida sat upright. Their expressions were either indifferent or helpless. Perhaps ordinary people didn't know the current situation in the North, or perhaps they knew very little. However, Wu Ding and the other 2 were not ordinary people. Due to the long distance, their information might be a little outdated, but they were absolutely clear about the specific situation. For example, a certain shameless fellow would go back on his word and take advantage of the Gray Coat Army's escape from the 100,000 Mountains to release the battle energy circulation channel into the market again. It was obvious that they felt like they had been tricked. Wait a minute. All right, junior brother. Sea Tower rubbed his forehead and waved his hand to stop Winston, who had just finished listening to the latest news he had brought from the capital and had been chattering and cursing nonstop. He said helplessly, "We agreed with him to come first, and the Gray Coat Army will come later. Besides, we are enemies, so we can't blame anyone for this." With a light snort, Winston curled his lips unwillingly and finally stopped talking. On the other side, Haita smiled bitterly and sighed inwardly, lamenting that his junior brother's state of mind was still not open-minded enough. He still couldn't forget that defeat. He turned to Wu Ding and said, "Master, the situation in the north isn't looking good. Recently, the northern wilderness tribes have been moving more frequently. A battle is unavoidable this winter. Now that the Gray Coat Army has come out to mess things up, if we don't handle it well, Bran might lose before the battle." Frowning slightly, Wu Ding nodded lightly, indicating that he understood but didn't say anything. On the other hand, Winston couldn't hold it in anymore and said disapprovingly, "Senior brother, you overestimate the Gray Coat Army. It's just that the situation is special now. Otherwise, any small army from the front lines would be enough to destroy them." "Oh, then what do you think Bran should do now?" Wu Ding lowered his eyelids and asked noncommittally. "It's very simple. First, deal with the Gray Coat Army." "Master, this is what I think." Haita had spent the most time with Wu Ding and understood his master's temper the best. When he heard this, his heart jumped. He knew that his master didn't think highly of Winston's opinion and winked at him. However, Winston was eager to express his opinion and didn't notice. "The Gray Coat Army took advantage of the fact that we didn't have time to care about them and caused such a big mess in the north. However, although this problem seems complicated, it's actually very simple to solve. Previously, after killing the former leader called Losha, the Gray Coat Army fled into the depths of the 100,000 Mountains. Now, as long as we kill the new leader, we can achieve the same result." He didn't know where he heard it from or if he really thought of it himself. Winston's words coincided with what the northern military forces was doing now, which was to capture the leader. However, Wu Ding didn't have any expression of appreciation when he heard this. He only continued to ask, "Then, who will do this?" Winston was stunned when he heard this. In fact, he wanted to say that he would do it himself, but when he saw the look Haita gave him, he suddenly understood. That's right, who should he send? It was easy to deal with the new leader of the Gray Coat Army. Although he heard that he was a mage, his realm wasn't high. Sending an expert over should be able to solve the problem. However, when he thought of the person protecting the leader of the rebel army, Tang In, who had broken one of his arms before, his heart immediately weakened. Although he didn't want to admit it and had a lot of belittling, Winston understood in his heart. That Tang In didn't seem to be famous, but he was definitely an expert. Moreover, he was an expert who could withstand the sword of his master, the sword god. It was also because this matter hadn't been publicized. Otherwise, that Tang In would have become famous in one battle and shaken the entire continent. Moreover, ever since that failure, Winston had actually secretly investigated Tang In. Although he was limited by the other party's low profile and the deliberate concealment of a certain faction, he didn't find much information. However, when it came to people at Winston's level, once he wanted to investigate, the resources and connections he used were extremely terrifying. Basically, he could always find the information he wanted to see. Among them, there was no need to mention Sylvia and Owens. From these two people, it could be roughly seen that Tang In was almost invincible in the Earth realm. In addition, not long ago, in the shocking battle in a small city civilian academy, that Tang In, under heavy encirclement, was actually able to kill a magister and a genuine Void Realm warrior, turning the tables in one fell swoop. This wasn't the most terrifying thing. From the analysis of the known information, Winston also came to a piece of information that he was extremely unwilling to believe, that Tang In's martial arts talent might be even above his. In fact, by saying this, Winston was already flattering himself. After all, from the history of Tang Un's few short spans of time: Earth Realm Warrior, Great Mage, Void Realm Warrior, Magister. In less than 2 years, Tang En had gone from a miserable warrior who was chased into the northern wilderness by Sylvia to a Void Realm Warrior who could fight against the Divine Palace's Void Realm Warrior head-on, and even receive a sword strike from the Sword God. It had to be said that this scared Winston a little. Of course, because of this heaven-defying speed of improvement, Winston definitely didn't believe it. He only thought that this was caused by Tang En deliberately concealing his strength in the past. But even if he took another step back, when he thought about how Tang En, who was about the same age as him, had such strength, Wesselin couldn't help but be secretly shocked. It was because he had become a disciple of the Sword God and had many resources from the family that he could use at will that he was able to advance to his current realm. But what about Tang En, a guy who came out of nowhere, could actually cultivate to this level? Was it really because his martial arts talent was higher than his? Well, Winston, who had been crowned with all kinds of genius titles since he was born, was definitely jealous. But jealousy was jealousy, and some facts had to be faced. If he rashly sent an expert to provoke such a person, even if it was a Void Realm Warrior, he would most likely be defeated. Who do you think should go? Wu Ding asked calmly again, interrupting the various complicated thoughts in Winston's heart. Should, maybe, or a few Void Realm Warriors from many sects can. The more he spoke, the weaker his voice became. At this time, Winston also knew that he had thought too simply. Although the number of Void Realm Warriors was small, with their ability, they could certainly find them if they wanted to. But this method could be used by others, but they couldn't, because they were the invincible Sword God's bloodline. If they asked for help for this kind of thing, once it spread out, they would lose a lot of face. And if he used other channels to secretly search, then the various interests involved would be a big problem. After all, a void stage cultivator was not a cabbage. A cultivator who could reach such a height was either a guest elder of a large family or a grandmaster of their own sect. The implications were too wide. Thinking of this, suddenly, Winston's heart moved. He looked up at Wu Ding. Maybe if Master, junior brother, actually the key to solving this problem is Tang En. Seeing that there was a faint anger between Wu Ding's brows, Haita hurriedly opened his mouth to interrupt Winston. How could he not know that as long as Master made a move, this matter would be easily solved? But Haita was even more clear that Master was really old. If he were to travel back and forth for thousands of miles, it would be a big problem if his body could bear it. He smoothed things over and said, "Oh right, I forgot to say something. The identity of Josiah, the leader of the Gray Coat Army, has been investigated. His family is a small aristocrat in Lion City. As long as we keep an eye on that side, we should be able to see Tang Un." After a pause, meeting Wu Ding's and Winston's puzzled gazes, Haita spread his hands and smiled. That Tang En and Josiah's relationship is not shallow. They should be lovers. Winston said in surprise, "There's such a thing?" Haita nodded. Yes, in fact, ever since we received the news that the Gray Coat Army had come out of the 100,000 Mountains, the palace has been investigating the identity of the new leader. There are not many mages in the first place, and they are female, ice element, and still young. Combining these conditions, it's only a matter of time before they find out the information from the Guild of Magic. As for the relationship between lovers, this is what Philip said. It shouldn't be wrong. Let's give it a try. Although this method is a little underhanded, if you have the chance to see that Tang En, give me a word. All right. After thinking for a while, Wu Ding looked at this eldest disciple, who had a high status in the palace castle. Who was this handed over to? Philip, he asked for it. Haita's expression was a little strange. Him? Wu Ding was obviously stunned. Why does he care about this? Haita's expression became even more strange. He said that this is a rare opportunity, so he wants to poach and please the future madam's father and mother. What? Chapter 9:30. What? No matter which world it was, there was no lack of people who would seek death on their own. Now, in Winston's eyes, Philip was undoubtedly such a weirdo. Knowing that Josiah was Tang En's lover, he still went to steal her. Well, From a personal point of view, Winston was still very happy to be able to bring trouble to Tang Yin. But if he only evaluated it from Philip's point of view, what kind of mental illness was this? Wu Ding was also shocked when he heard this, but he thought more. Wu Ding naturally knew his grandson's character very well. The illustrious name of the imperial capital's flower wolf was something that even he, who had lived outside the city for a long time, had heard of. It was no exaggeration to say that the elder of the woman's family, who could be involved with his grandson, that could only be the character who chased Philip for a few streets with a machete after abandoning him after having sex with him. But now, to curry favor with the father and mother of the future wife. Was his kid serious? Slightly stunned, the first thought that flashed through the mind of the brand god of swords was not that this move might offend Tang Yin, but that he began to consider. It was rare for his grandson to show signs of giving in. Should he intervene and not let the leader of the Gray Coat Army, named Josiah, be in danger? Pity the hearts of the elders in the world. A sentence made the atmosphere fall into a short silence. Sea Tower nodded with satisfaction, knowing that he had achieved his goal of changing the topic and easing the atmosphere. He quickly got up and stopped while he was ahead. "It's about time, junior brother. You leave with me and let Master have good rest." Pause for a while. He secretly winked at Winston, but the latter was in a daze. His eyes flickered, as if he was thinking about something, and ignored the look again. Helplessly, Haita nodded at Wu Ding and continued, "Master, I still have some matters to take care of in the imperial court, so I won't stay any longer." "Haha, the main thing is that the temple hasn't stopped testing us. We need to make arrangements to dispel their suspicions." This was not a completely random excuse. After causing a ruckus at the northern shrine, Wu Ding, who had decided to go all the way, took Seda and Winston through the long-distance teleportation formation and continuously teleported into the shrine headquarters. Then, he suddenly launched an attack. A huge golden ringed blade slashed open the outer defense of the temple headquarters. Then, under the watchful eyes of the temple's experts, who were caught off guard, he left leisurely. There is no doubt that this was the greatest humiliation the Divine Hall had suffered in the past hundreds of years. After coming to their senses, the temple immediately went crazy. On one hand, they sealed off the news, and on the other hand, they mobilized all their forces to investigate like mad dogs, causing a huge disturbance. But because Wu Ding had brought along the disguise item that Tang and had given him when he made the move, for the time being, no one, not even the Temple of Gods, suspected Sword God Bran to be the culprit. Wu Ding, who had stayed out of the matter, watched the show without any pressure. In private, he gloated over the Temple Master's misfortune. Of course, not everyone was an idiot. After the initial madness, the Temple Masters, who had gradually regained their rationality, began to cast suspicious gazes at Wu Ding. After all, there were not many people who had such shocking strength and the courage to provoke the Temple of Light. Among them, the Sword God clan, who had always been at odds with the temple, was undoubtedly the most suspicious. But when it came to matters of this level, a slight move in one part would affect the whole situation. If the Temple Masters could not find conclusive evidence, they naturally would not dare to fall out with Wu Ding based on mere speculation. Under the watchful eyes of the public, many people in the Temple Masters saw that the one who made the move was a middle-aged man with a simple face. Later, they found out that he was the mysterious master who had caused havoc in the Temple Masters in the north. It was not Wu Ding at all, and there was no news that pointed out that Wu Ding had gone down the mountain to the north. So in the end, other than constantly sending people to probe carefully, there was basically nothing to be found. When it came to this matter, the three people in the field all had smiles on their faces. Everything was understood without words. Those hypocrites. I'm afraid they don't have time to pay attention to us now. I heard that their internal affairs have not been peaceful recently. After coming back to his senses, Winston sneered disapprovingly. Well, I don't know if it's because the successive blows were too sudden, but the Temple Masters, who have always been peaceful, have forgotten how to deal with things. They've really been acting up lately. Nodding, Sea Tower's expression also had a faint mocking smile. Junior, your information is not false. The temple masters are indeed not peaceful. Recently, they've been purging the Puritans. It's said that even the Flower of Knights, Holy Head Knight Sylvia, has been escorted back from the north to be put on trial. Her ending should not be good. Wu Ding was slightly surprised. Sylvia? Master, you've heard of her too? Nodding, Wu Ding showed some appreciation. I've seen her once in the Northern Temple. I remember that she has some relationship with Tang Yin. They should be friends. She's also one of the few people in the temple that I don't dislike. Then do we need to... Sea Tower heard this and asked tentatively. After hesitating, Wu Ding waved his hand and replied, Forget it. Let the internal affairs of the temple be messed up by themselves. It's not good for us to intervene. This was a fact. Sea Tower nodded in agreement. At this time, Wincelin seemed to have suddenly thought of something and laughed gloatingly. By the way, I remember that the Grey Coat Army has a deep conflict with the Temple of Light, right? So, after half a year of recuperation, the temple's various efforts to revive the North were all for naught. Ha! Ha! Who said it wasn't? It's another joke. Wu Ding's white eyebrows suddenly rose as he thought of something. He shook his head and sighed. I see. I understand. Master, what do you understand? Sea Tower and Wincelin looked at each other and asked in surprise. I understand Tang Yin's plan. When I was making trouble with him in the Northern Temple, I felt a little strange. Because the condition I promised was that I wouldn't take the initiative to help him. In this case, in fact, the damage he could cause to the temple was very limited. It's not an exaggeration to say that he was just scratching an itch through a boot. On the contrary, the temple would be completely enraged, which was really unwise. At that time, I just thought that he had a deep hatred for the temple, so he would pounce on them whenever he had the chance. But now it seems that he already knew that the Grey Coat Army would kill their way out of the 100,000 mountains, so he didn't need to care about the temple's revenge. Haha, one step after another, we have also become his chess pieces. What a good plan. After talking about Tang Yin's complete plan, Wu Ding didn't look angry, but just sighed with admiration. And this also made Sea Tower and Wincelin on the side stunned, and they suddenly felt a chill in their hearts. This guy actually calculated so deeply. Well, it's just after the event. Just listen to it. Waving his hand, Wu Ding got up and leaned back on the wooden chair by the pond. He picked up the bamboo fishing rod and narrowed his eyes slightly, just like an ordinary farmer's leisurely image. Seeing this, Sea Tower and Wincelin bowed and silently left the backyard. And at this moment, under the sparse bamboo shadow, Wu Ding opened his turbid eyes again. He tilted his head and thought about something. After a moment, the corners of his mouth rose slightly. Sylvia, haha, interesting. Will you save her? After a pause, his gaze turned to the wooden door of the backyard. He narrowed his eyes, and a sharp light seemed to penetrate the wooden door and see the figure of the disciple who had just left. He murmured softly, Well, this time I'll borrow your hand to give him a memorable lesson. Senior brother, wait. In the bluestone corridor, Wincelin hurriedly took a few steps to stop Sea Tower, who turned around and said, I suddenly remembered that I haven't visited Mother at home for a long time. I miss her a little. I'll go pack up and go down the mountain with you later. Haha, okay. Sea Tower didn't think too much and smiled gently. A few days ago, I met Uncle and just mentioned this. He said that you really haven't visited home for a long time. Well, but Master, Wincelin hurriedly said, It's just a few days. It doesn't matter. Sea Tower thought for a moment and nodded. That's true. Then you go pack up. I'll wait in the front yard. Okay. Thank you, senior brother. After bowing and turning around, the smile on Wincelin's face disappeared instantly. He secretly clenched his fists, and a few cold lights flashed in his eyes. This time you'll definitely come to the south, right, Tang Yin? Humph. Let's have a real fight again and see who's more talented. This time, I'll definitely not let you go back to the north. Chapter 9:31. Dawn. The sun had just risen and the thin mist was about to disperse. The unique, warm, and lazy light of winter poured down and scattered over the sky of the large southern city's northern district. Rows of exquisite manors were separated by a polite distance so that they wouldn't disturb each other. The architectural styles may be different, but the interior decorations were all luxurious and tasteful. Large fields of grass, beautiful sculptures, creative fountains. Although they were not in the eastern district of the city's nobles, these manors located in the northern district of the city's wealthy merchants were not as shabby as the former. Some of them were even better. This had nothing to do with status, only the charm of money. Now, in front of one of the luxurious manors that was even more luxurious than most of the noble manors, burly guards were pushing open the iron gates left and right. A well-dressed coachman was driving an exquisite carriage that slowly stopped under the steps in front of the gate. All of this indicated that the owner of the manor might be leaving soon. Just then, "Darling, you really can't go with me?" "Sorry, Anika, I already made an appointment with the Count in the morning yesterday. Also, as you know, you're all ladies and have common topics to talk about. It's not appropriate for me to go." Gently explaining, a young man and woman walked out of the gates side by side. The man's face was slightly delicate, but because of the short beard on his chin, he had a hint of maturity. The woman in his arms was tall and elegant. Her delicate face with light makeup had a hint of coquettishness. She shook his arm, "But I already promised Betsy. Also, aren't you all from Lion City? She really wants to see you this time." "It's only because of business, Anika." The young man raised his hand and stroked his female companion's soft hair. He chuckled softly and said, "I know very well why she's here." "Well, how about this? You go and talk to her on my behalf. Agree to cooperate with her family." But I don't know anything about business negotiations. What if I lose?" She covered her mouth and exclaimed. The beautiful woman named Anika was both surprised and happy. On one hand, she was happy that her male companion trusted her, but on the other hand, she was not confident in her own business. "Haha, don't worry. This is a long-term cooperation. You won't lose. Besides, since she's your good friend, it's only right to take care of her." The young man smiled as he helped Anika into the luxurious carriage. "Well, thank you, darling." Hearing this, Anika's face lit up with joy. She stretched out her neck and kissed the young man's face. "Well, have fun then." Waving his hand, the young man turned around with a smile. Just as he was about to wave his hand for the coachman to close the door and leave, his gaze suddenly froze as he looked ahead. More than 100 feet away, a group of dozens of people appeared out of nowhere and scattered in an arc. They blocked the middle of the road and strode over. However, what attracted the young man's attention wasn't their impolite behavior, but the manner and temperament of these dozens of people. The kind of iron-blooded aura that would be revealed as long as they gathered together was something that only soldiers who had been through hundreds of battles in the military could possess. "Guys, you guys seem to be in the way." With such a menacing group of burly men approaching, it was impossible for the guards scattered around to not notice them. They quickly stepped forward and blocked the carriage. However, the guard captain seemed to have recognized the identity of this group of people, so his attitude was still relatively polite. "Oh, sorry, this is because we don't have an appointment." A young man in a luxurious robe walked out from behind the dozens of people blocking the road. His handsome face had a charming smile that made people feel comfortable as he shrugged and spread his hands. Just by his words and actions, one could see that this young man was obviously different from the dozens of people who had an iron-blooded aura around him. He didn't seem like someone from the military, but more like an elegant noble. However, of course, this wasn't the reason why the guards let him pass. Moreover, from a young man's words just now, it was obvious that they were here for this place. Shaking his head, he said, "Then I'm sorry, my master doesn't see unfamiliar visitors." "Is that so? Why don't you ask?" Hearing this, the handsome young man didn't seem dispirited at all. His gaze went past the guards and looked at the young man standing in the carriage. He waved his hand and greeted with familiarity. "Hello, Alan. Nice to meet you. My name is Philip." Although this place was in the south, it was far from the capital, so the people present naturally didn't know the meaning of this name, except for one person. The young man, Alan, suddenly looked serious when he heard this. The pupils in his eyes shrank sharply, but soon eased and relaxed. He took a small breath and waved his hand to signal the guards to retreat. Let them come over. Huh, I knew you must have heard of me. But I guess that guy won't say good things about me behind my back, right? Indeed. Believe me, that's slander. He's definitely jealous. Since this handsome young man was Philip and the young man was Alan, then the so-called guy was of course Tang Yin. Philip and Alan were both Tang Yin's friends, but the two didn't know each other before. Tang Yin couldn't have introduced Philip to Alan. He only mentioned this person to Alan when they were chatting. Now that Philip suddenly came uninvited, the meaning behind this was self-evident. Although he knew that he had been exposed, Alan didn't panic. He only frowned and asked, "Can I ask, how did you find this place?" Philip waved his hand casually. "Oh, that was just an accident. We found out Josiah's family, but after we went to Lion City, we found nothing. After asking around, we found out that this family suddenly disappeared overnight. In fact, you've been very careful. We still don't know where the family was moved to. But you know, this is the brand's land after all. And if you want to save people, some procedures can't be avoided. For example, the soldiers who were paid a lot of money to open the city gates at night. After all, it was a migration of a family, so there would be some traces left. And in the brand's land, if the brand's court used all their forces to search, it was only a matter of time before they found the family." "Understood. Thank you." Alan nodded and said self-deprecatingly, "Looks like gold coins aren't omnipotent. You're right. This is indeed the brand's land. I was careless, but I didn't expect it to be you who came to find me." "No, actually I'm more surprised. Who would have thought that the president of the famous Yadong business group would be?" Before he could finish, "Darling, what's wrong?" "Who is he?" Feeling that the carriage under her didn't move, Anika couldn't help but lift the curtain outside the window. She first looked at Philip, then looked at the dozens of men scattered around and faintly surrounded them. She immediately asked nervously. Alan's body tensed up when he heard this. For the first time, his calm expression showed some panic. He licked his lips and slowly relaxed. He said calmly, "Nothing. I met an old friend that I haven't seen in a long time, so I chatted for a while." Spreading his hands, he looked directly at Philip and his eyes suddenly brightened. He introduced, "This is Philip. Philip, this is my fiancée, Anika. She's going to meet some guests now." "Oh, right. Don't be fooled by her beauty. She's actually quite dumb and doesn't know anything." "Ha, darling." Anika didn't understand the double meaning in his words. She was embarrassed and annoyed when she heard this. However, his nervousness gradually dissipated without him realizing it. Since Alan would tease her in front of a stranger, then this must be a very special friend. After a pause, Philip looked at Alan's brightening eyes and waved his arms behind his back. The men surrounding them immediately stepped back and made way. Then, he took a step forward and smiled elegantly and charmingly. "Oh, beautiful Miss Anika, it's an honor to meet you." Before he could finish his sentence, Alan slapped away Philip's arm that was about to kiss him expressionlessly. "Sorry, it was a conditioned reflex." Then, he turned to look at Anika, who was covering her mouth and giggling. His expression turned gentle. "Go, it's almost time for the appointment." "Okay, see you later, Sir Philip." She nodded politely and put down the curtains. The luxurious car swayed and slowly drove away. "TSK, what a beautiful, noble lady." Philip looked away reluctantly and smacked his lips. He turned to look at the expressionless Alan. "Why? Why what? You're about to get married, and with your status and wealth, there's no need for you to do such a dangerous thing, right? Or are you also a member of the Gray Coat Army?" "No." Alan shook his head and said calmly, "I'm Sir's man." "Sir? What do you mean, Tang Yin?" Alan didn't deny it. "Everything I have now was given to me by Sir. It's natural for me to do things for him, including things that might send you to the gallows." "Of course," he answered firmly. Stunned, he frowned and muttered, "I really couldn't tell that guy had this ability. Okay, let's get to know each other officially." Taking a step back, Philip bowed solemnly and said seriously, "Philip, Tangen's friend. Alan was slightly stunned and bowed in return. Alan, sir's subordinate. Huh, he won't treat you as a subordinate. But since you're already acquainted, it shouldn't be a problem for my friend to ask for your help, right? Philip put his arm around Alan's shoulder as if they were close friends. His serious and solemn expression instantly disappeared, and he revealed a flattering smile. So, where are Josiah's elders now? Alan immediately looked to him warily. Philip touched his forehead and looked hurt. Why are you looking at me like that? You don't have to be so vigilant. I'm not here to catch them. Don't worry, I'm just getting to know each other and getting to know each other. P.S. About to thank my book friends Heavenly Axiom and Saints, Shadow Sniper, and One Breath, Parting Dust for their tips. Chapter 9:32. Putting aside the conversation between Philip and Alan, a moment later, in the Eastern District, a luxurious carriage that had just arrived from the Northern District slowly came to a stop in front of an exquisite building that didn't take up much space. There were only a few small, exquisite buildings. In terms of scale, this couldn't be considered a manor. However, the owner's status was the same as the owners of the surrounding manors and castles. They were all nobles. This didn't mean that the nobles living here were poor, but that every noble family had their own main residence. In other cities, there was no need to be so extravagant. A few small buildings would be enough as a place to stay. Then, Annika, dressed in a long white cotton dress, walked out of the carriage. In the exquisite building, a young woman dressed in casual black clothes with her hair tied up in a ponytail walked out. She looked mature and capable, but she didn't lose her noble temperament. She bowed and smiled. "Good morning, Annika. I've been waiting for you for a long time. Why, Mr. Allen didn't come." "Good morning, Sister Betsy." Annika returned the greeting and stepped forward, hugging the young noblewoman called Betsy intimately. "Sorry, I made an appointment for you, but a guest came at the last minute, so he won't be able to come this time." "Oh, that's a pity, but it's okay. We'll have another chance." Betsy looked disappointed when she heard this, but she quickly adjusted herself and said considerately, "Why do we have to wait for another time? Sister Betsy." Annika blinked her bright eyes and raised her chin slightly, proudly revealing a few inches of her slender neck. Annika, will be the person in charge of this negotiation. I agree to the cooperation between the Yadong Business Group and your family." She couldn't hold back her laughter at the end of her sentence. Betsy was stunned when she heard this. She shook her head and sighed when she came back to her senses. "Alan is really good to you." Pause for a while. Looking at Anika's proud little face, I couldn't help but smile and reach out to press down on her chin. Got it, Anika. I'll do my best to curry favor with you, little president." "Becky, sis." With a coquettish voice, Annika shook Becky's arm and lowered her blushing face in embarrassment. "Don't make fun of me. Sis is the real powerful female president of a business family." This wasn't completely flattery. Anika and Betsy had a good relationship, so she naturally knew what her best friend was capable of. Logically speaking, as a noble, it was natural for him to be involved in the family business. But don't forget, Betsy's identity was a noble lady. The business field was not something she should be involved in, nor was it something she was good at. But not only did she do it, she did it very well and dazzlingly. This was evident from the fact that her family had sent her here to negotiate with the Yadong Business Group, which was in the limelight. However, Betsy didn't show the pride and joy that she should have after being praised. Instead, the corners of her mouth curled up into a bitter smile as she sighed softly. "Is it great? It's just that I was forced to do it." Anika thought of something when she heard this and covered her mouth as she said softly, "I'm sorry, Sis Betsy. I didn't mean to mention this." It's okay. You're such an enviable little fellow," Betsy said nonchalantly as she tapped Anika's smooth forehead and instantly adjusted her expression. The two of them stood together. Even though they were of similar age, their auras were completely different. One was mature and calm, while the other was innocent and delicate. Anika, who was called a little fellow, didn't seem to mind at all as she hugged Betsy's arm coquettishly as if this was how it should be. All right. Since Mr. Allen isn't here, then there's no need to be so formal on this date. Let's go. You can go to my room first. I'll get you a cup of honey water. Thank you. Please add sweet pomelo spice. Got it, my little president. Ah, Sis Betsy, you're making fun of me again? Perhaps it was because this date was more important and she was worried that the walls might have ears, so Betsy temporarily dismissed the servants. Thus, when Anika walked into the exquisite little building, she didn't see anyone. When she pushed open Betsy's door with familiarity, wow, Anika couldn't help but cover her mouth as she exclaimed with a slightly stunned expression. The room wasn't big and wasn't as luxurious and exquisite as a noble lady's room. Instead, it looked a little messy. The most conspicuous thing was the wide desk, which was much larger than the dressing table. It was almost the same size as the soft bed. Piled on top of it were thick books, sheets of wool paper, and an unfinished cup of green drink. Oh, it was a kind of refreshing bitter juice used to stay up late to work. Anika had seen Alan drink it before and had tried a small sip out of curiosity, but she never touched it again. Sis Betsy. Anika came back to her senses and looked at everything in front of her. It was as if she could see Betsy wearing a coat, drinking the bitter drink, and staying up late to deal with all sorts of family matters. She unconsciously bit her lips and revealed an expression of admiration and pity. It's too tiring. This isn't something you should be shouldering, as a noble and so familiar with each other. Anika naturally knew about Betsy's family situation. It was an illustrious count family, and the current head of the count was even the mayor of a city. Betsy, as the youngest daughter of the family, should have enjoyed a carefree and beautiful life like most noble ladies. However, after her two elder brothers suddenly died of illness, and the old earl stepped down from his position as the city lord, everything changed. The burden of the entire family was now on her shoulders. Actually, she could have just not accepted it and married into a noble family of equal status. All the pressure would have been removed from her, and no one would have said anything about it. However, she didn't. She chose to participate in family matters and took over the family business, developing it until now. Why aren't you going in? Why are you standing at the door? Just as Anika was in a daze, Becky walked over from behind with two light yellow drinks in her hands. When she saw Anika's dazed expression, she thought of something and shrugged apologetically. Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at something last night and forgot to clean it up. It must be very messy inside. No. She hadn't noticed it earlier, but now that she saw the scene in front of her, Annika noticed the faint blood vessels in Becky's eyes. Becky's eyes were dark under the light makeup, and she couldn't hide her fatigue. She couldn't help but go up and hug her gently. Sister Becky, so you've been working so hard all this time. After a pause, Betsy understood and shook her head with a smile. It's not always like this, and it's not as hard as you think. But, waving her hand to interrupt, Betsy smiled. It's really nothing. I like my current state very much. It's very fulfilling, and I feel a sense of accomplishment. Becky didn't seem to want to talk about this. After a few words of consolation, she put down the tray and casually changed the topic. Let's talk about you, Anika. You found a good man and even got engaged. When are you going to officially marry him? Anika was a noble lady who hadn't experienced much and didn't realize that the topic had been changed. She pouted and weakly lay on the soft bed, muttering, "What good?" Betsy was surprised. Then she thought of something and frowned. You're still not satisfied? Anika, although Alan isn't a noble and he's not that handsome, believe me. But believe me, when you have enough experience, you will know that he is much, much better than those nobles who only know how to enjoy themselves with their good looks. It's not like that. Sister Betsy, you misunderstood. Anika was stunned at first. Then she quickly sat up and shook her head to deny it. Then what's the reason? It can't be that he has a problem in that area, right? Betsy touched her chin and nodded seriously. That's indeed a big problem. Although they were elegant nobles, when two women got together in private, as long as they were close enough, they could talk about anything. No, we're not married yet. He respects me a lot. It hasn't reached that stage. Betsy, sister, Anika panicked and explained while looking at the smiling Betsy. How could she not know that she was being teased? She subconsciously pulled the blanket to cover her blushing face. Then she got up and hugged Betsy's delicate body, shaking it nonstop. Okay, it's my fault. Stop shaking, but you have to tell me what's not good about him, right? Betsy sat on the wooden chair beside the desk, as if all the energy in her body was sucked out by this question. She bit her lips and hesitated. Finally, she said hesitantly, "Actually, this is just my intuition. I feel that Alan doesn't like me that much. At least, he doesn't like me wholeheartedly. The way he looks at me, touches my hair, kisses me, it feels like he's looking at another person, and I'm just a substitute." She paused as if she suddenly thought of something and continued in distress. "Oh, right. The last time we went to the north, he said he was going to bring me to see an extremely important sister called Lena. Sister Betsy, do you know that Lena's appearance and figure are really similar to mine? Do you think that the one he really likes is Lena?" "Huh." Betsy suddenly burst into laughter. She pointed at the stunned Annika as she leaned over and held her waist as if she was about to burst out laughing. When Annika looked embarrassed, Betsy finally laughed. Annika, what are you thinking about?" "Ha, I know that Lena. She's a talented master alchemist and the chief designer of the Yatong Business Group's creative products. It could be said that she's the main reason why the Yatong Business Group could develop to its current scale. Alan is her closest partner, and he's also an orphan. Of course, he has to bring her to meet his lover. But you huff. You're guarding against him. Stop laughing, Sister Betsy. I know all this, but I just feel that something's wrong." Annika pouted unhappily. Betsy held her chest and tried hard to stop laughing. She shook her head and said seriously, "All right, let's not talk about whether Alan really has someone else in his heart. Annika, you have to remember that everyone has their own privacy. There are some things that lovers, spouses, and parents can't tell. And there's no need to worry about these things. You just have to know that even if Alan has someone else in his heart, he'll still choose you in the end. He'll still wear the wedding ring and spend the rest of his life with you. Confirming this is enough for us women. Is that really the case?" Annika asked hesitantly. "Of course." She answered affirmatively. Betsy's lips curled into a mocking smile. "Annika, you're also a noble. You should know the dirty things in this circle. Compared to those bastard men who are still flirting everywhere after marriage, or even openly raising mistresses outside, I just think about how decent and rare Alan is." "Oh, I understand. It was just an intuition." Now that she heard Betsy's logical and detailed analysis, Annika felt the haze in her heart disappear. A happy smile appeared on her face again. "Thank you, Sister Betsy. Hearing you say that, my Alan is really a rare good man. My Alan." Betsy pretended to be angry. "So you're here today to show off your love and provoke me?" "Of course not. I really have some doubts in my heart." Seeing this, Annika hurriedly hugged Becky's arm to please her. She rolled her eyes and asked, "Oh right, Sister Becky, do you have someone you like? Don't say it if you don't know how to change the topic." Unhappily flicking Annika's smooth forehead, Betsy tidied her clothes and said casually, "No." Annika stuck out her tongue and asked in disbelief, "How can that be? There are so many people chasing after you." This was the truth. Betsy was a noble lady, and a very beautiful one at that. After handling the family business, she gained a unique temperament that most noble ladies didn't have. Naturally, she was more popular. However, Betsy was calm. "It's just that there are so many idiots. Even if there are a few who aren't, I'm not the only one who likes them." Annika couldn't help but fall silent. She had stayed by Betsy's side for a long time and heard a lot. After broadening her horizons, Annika indeed recognized the idiotic nature of those noble youths who flaunted themselves as elegant. An ordinary youth with ambition wouldn't be so simple when chasing after Betsy. After all, not all youths with ordinary backgrounds were like Alan. Betsy's current identity was the only direct eldest daughter of the Count's family. If they married her, they would have a meteoric rise. Not many people could resist this temptation. Realizing that she had asked a question she shouldn't have, Annika awkwardly turned her head and patted the thick stack of books on the table. She awkwardly changed the topic. Sister Betsy's standards are too high. Also, look, you work so hard. Where would you find the time to fall in love? And what's this? Annika paused. When she patted an open book, a piece of white paper fell from the book and landed on the table. She subconsciously looked down. It was a portrait. Other than the overly long eyes, the rest of the four features and the face were ordinary. The brushwork was exquisite and fine. It was obviously a masterpiece that had been polished for a long time. Look at what I found. Recovering from her shock, Annika quickly picked up the portrait. Like a weasel that had entered a chicken coop, she sneakily looked at Betsy, who was suddenly stunned. You hit it really well, Sister Betsy. You even put his portrait in your must-read book every day. I can't get it. Annika's arm reached back and avoided Betsy's hand. Give it back, Annika. It's not what you think. I don't know where this portrait came from. I haven't even seen the book yet. Betsy, who had always maintained a mature and calm appearance, panicked for the first time. Nimbly dodging, Annika proudly waved the portrait and stroked the edge of the paper with her finger. You can't fool me, Sister Betsy. The edge of the paper is so soft. It's obviously the result of looking at it for a long time. Tell me the truth. Who is he? Seeing that she couldn't scare the usually dumb Annika, Betsy quickly changed her strategy and spread out her hand. Okay, I admit, I do know him, but he really isn't my lover. Then who is he? Annika obviously didn't believe her. But before Betsy could come up with a reason, she looked at the portrait in her hand and was stunned. She subconsciously whispered, that's strange. Why does he look so familiar? I think I've seen him somewhere before. He is what? Betsy's body trembled when she heard this. She grabbed Annika's wrist and said excitedly, You've seen him? Really? Where is he? Tell me. Sister Betsy, you're hurting me. Annika screamed and subconsciously struggled. She instantly let go of her wrist and grabbed Annika's shoulder. Sorry. It's my fault. Think, where did you see him? Annika was shocked by Betsy's emotional expression. This was the first time she saw it, and Betsy's eyes didn't seem to be filled with joy from suddenly hearing news about her lover, but hatred? Unconcealable excitement and hatred. Was it an illusion? I also forgot. I just felt that he looked familiar. P.S. Some people say that raccoons forgot about Betsy. You're too naive. Is the nickname of the Demon King of Craters for nothing? Chapter 9:33. Achoo. Boss, you caught a cold. Are you kidding me? How is that possible? Someone must be missing me. Yes, it must be a beautiful woman. Her thoughts are so strong. This was a small port city in the south. It was backed by the Lino River, which was known as the economic artery of the brand. Its development momentum was very good. At this time, it was busy in the morning. The loading and unloading of goods at the port was abnormally busy. People came and went, accompanied by rising and falling shouts. It was very lively. At the periphery of the pier, under the shade provided for the porters and handymen to rest, two mysterious men in hooded robes sat on stone benches. They looked at the lively scene in front of them and chatted casually. Among them, a common face in a portrait said, Michaud, you're from the north, right? Is this your first time in the South? No. I came here a few times with my family when I was young. I have an uncle here. Oh, then you must not remember clearly. In fact, I'm not familiar with this place. It's a pity that I didn't find a cargo ship passing by Lion City. Otherwise, I would be quite familiar with it. I can also curry favor with my future father-in-law. Or something. The other person hesitated and decided to ignore the second half of the sentence. He said, I heard the boss mention it. You set off from Lion City and followed the Lino River all the way to the north. Yes, and then I was constantly being chased. At this point, there was no need for introductions. These two people were naturally Tang and Michaud, who came from the north by ship. After intimidating the assassins around Josiah, and then recruiting Baylor, a fierce general, the Gray Coat army had been greatly stabilized. At this point, Tangin's mission in the north was almost completed. Naturally, the next step was to go to the south and find a way to delay Wu Ding. This time, the one who came with Tang Un was not David and the other members of the Gray Space, but the assassination team led by Mi Shou. After all, although Tang In scared away most of the assassins, it was hard to guarantee that there would not be some who were patient enough to wait for an opportunity to make a move. Therefore, it was necessary for David and the others to take over and guard Josiah. After some time of contact, he believed that Victor and the others wouldn't object to giving up their positions as Josiah's guards. However, although he had arranged everything and arrived in the south smoothly, Tangin's work had just begun. For the time being, there was no need to care about Wu Ding. Tang and had to confirm the situation of his father-in-law's family first. If there were no problems, he would think of a way to move the family to the Gray Coat Army's base in the north. Of course, the south was different from the north. Tang and was indeed unfamiliar with this place. He didn't even know the route to Lion City from here. Moreover, the south was not the main coverage area of the secret organization. It would not be as easy to get accurate information as it was in the north. This was also the reason why Tang In and Mi Shou were chatting after getting off the ship. They were waiting for news. Fortunately, because they had informed each other before departure, the waiting time was not too long. Just as the cargo ship that brought them here contacted the porter and began to unload the goods, a man dressed in a black robe and an old man in green walked quickly from a distance. Mi Shou stood up and greeted them. After all, if three mysterious people appeared in one place, it would be a bit eye-catching. Tang didn't care. He looked at the lively dock in front of him with interest. He remembered that a few years ago, when he found an assassin organization in Lion City, which was also the Bandits Guild, he received his first assassination mission. His target seemed to be someone at the port, a small leader of a gang called Violent Bear. Haha, after going around in circles, I feel like I'm back to square one. While he was sighing, Mi Shou returned to his side. The look under the brim of his hat was a bit strange. Boss, I heard two things. Oh, Tang In was surprised. He remembered that he had asked Mi Shou to investigate the situation of Josiah's family and point out how to get to Lion City. Your father-in-law seems to have been caught. Nanny, Tang In was stunned when he heard this, and then he understood. Was I a step behind? He was not surprised. After all, this was the brand's territory. He was not flustered because the brand had caught Josiah's family members to threaten Josiah and would not kill them immediately. In this way, there would be a chance to rescue them. However, Mi Shou shook his head and said again, Boss, it's not that simple. This matter seems to involve Alan. Alan? How? Instantly frowning, Tang Un's expression became more serious. I just asked him to take care of Josiah's family and take care of them when the time is right. How can he be involved? The South and the North were too far apart. Whether it was Tang In or the Gray Coat Army, it was beyond their reach. Therefore, Tang In did talk to Alan about Josiah's family, but he only asked him to take care of them. There were no other orders, and it was impossible for him to do so. After all, Tang In did not want the Yatong business group, which was developing well, to be involved. Maybe Alan misunderstood your meaning, or maybe he had no other choice, Mi Shou quickly explained. The secret organization does not have many people here. They were transferred here to take care of Josiah's family some time ago. However, by the time they arrived, Josiah's family had completely disappeared from Lion City. It was about a few days after the Gray Coat Army killed their way out of the Sherwan Mountains. Later, our people could not find the family's whereabouts, but the brand officials came to the city. After following that group of people for a few days, we found out that their destination was Songhai City. After a pause, Mi Shou looked at Tang Un. Boss, I remember you mentioned that the headquarters of the Yadong business group, which is Alan, lives in the city. Obviously, although there was no conclusive evidence, Mi Shou's deduction was correct. There are not many people who knew about Josiah's family. Since the brand officials came too late and did not manage to control Josiah's family in time, it was likely that Alan's family would have been attacked first. The one who would make a move in advance would probably be Alan, who saw that the situation was not good. Combined with the whereabouts of the officials of Brand, The word probably could be removed. He slammed his fist on the stone bench. Bang! I can't believe I implicated Alan. Tang Yin knew that this was most likely Alan's doing. His expression became more serious. The Yatong Business Group had been of great help to the Gray Coat Army. If it had not been for the Yatong Business Group sending food and supplies from time to time, Josiah and the others might not have been able to survive in the depths of the Sherwan Mountains. Not to mention Lena, the chief alchemist of the business group, and the procurement of materials to make the purple cannons. It was not an exaggeration to say that the Yatong Business Group had played an important role in the Gray Coat Army's ability to sweep across thousands of miles. However, other than Tang Yin's people, Josiah was the only one in the Gray Coat Army who knew about the Yatong Business Group. Everyone, including Tang Yin, knew that the relationship between the Yatong Business Group and the Gray Coat Army could not be exposed. Otherwise, under the suppression of the brand, the Gray Coat Army would lose an important pillar of support. But now, Tang Yin suddenly stood up and said decisively, "Let's go and find some horses. We'll set off for Songhai City now." "Okay. By the way, boss, there's one more thing." Misho's expression under the silver mask became more and more strange. Then, under Tang Yin's puzzled gaze, he hesitated and said, "Sylvia has been captured." "Who?" Twain was stunned when he heard this. He had not heard any news about Shavian for a long time. He only knew that she was now in the Northern Temple, arresting clergymen who had committed crimes and putting them on trial. Other than that, he did not know anything else. Now that he suddenly heard Sylvia's name and learned that she had been captured, he could not help but be stunned. Misho's current duty was to deal with things that Tang Yin could not show up, or things that were in the shadows, so he knew a little about the subtle relationship between his boss and Sylvia. Now that he saw Tang Yin's stunned reaction, he was naturally more certain. He continued, "It was done by people inside the temple. The crime is that Sylvia colluded with evil heretics, and they want to take her back to the temple headquarters for trial. The specific location is not clear, but according to the time, they should have just come from the north like us. Colluding with evil heretics. That's really boring." After coming back to his senses, Tang Yin recalled that Sylvia had used this excuse when she was first hunted down by the temple. He could not help but chuckle. Of course, although the excuse was the same, the situation was obviously different this time. Last time, it was a private excuse made by Bishop Byron and the other bishops. They just wanted to secretly kill Sylvia directly. Now that she was on the table and was being taken back to the temple headquarters for trial, Sylvia's ending this time was not good. So, Alan and Sylvia, who should he save? After a moment of silence, he said, "Big breasts are brainless. Big breasts are brainless. I've already reminded you, haven't I? And more than once. Why are you so stupid?" Gently shaking his head, Tang Yin took a deep breath and waved his hand expressionlessly. "Let's go. Saving Alan is more important." Chapter 934. When Tang Yin and the others had just set foot on the southern land, a team had just returned from the north and was moving towards the southern hinterland, as Misho said. This was a temple escort team. A large group of holy light knights were vigilant to clear the way, and a small group of robe mages were always holding their staffs. In addition, there was a faint, terrifying fluctuation around more than 10 large carriages. The lineup could be said to be luxurious. As for the criminals they were escorting, they were not evil heretics who were notorious for their heresy. They were their own people not long ago. Even one of the criminals was the object of admiration of these light knights who were traveling with the team. It should be because they were worried about being attacked, so this extremely vigilant temple team was not fast. By evening, they had not reached the next town, so they set up camp in the wilderness to rest. In the evening, around a few dim yellow tents, the light knights on night watch lit a pile of bonfires, looking around vigilantly from time to time. The atmosphere was slightly depressing. In fact, if one looked carefully at the corner of their eyes, one would know that their focus was not on the surrounding environment, but on a small tent not far away. Their expressions were complicated. A moment later, beside the bonfire, A hesitant voice finally broke the silence. He asked blankly, "Do you think that Lord really committed such a crime?" The name of the Lord was not mentioned, but the knights around the bonfire certainly knew. A moment later, one of them said, "It should be true. Many lords said so. I don't believe it." The young knight who spoke first looked slightly agitated. "A few years ago, when I was still a level 2 knight, I went out on a mission with the Lord. I clearly remember the Lord's attitude towards those evil heretics, and then he killed several heretic masters on the spot. How could he suddenly collude with the evil heretics that he hated the most before? I don't want to believe it either, but this is the truth. Humph. Isn't it all what those lords said?" Silence. Just when the young knight was still indignant, the middle-aged knight opposite him suddenly flashed his eyes and shouted in a deep voice. Then he quickly got up and bowed to the black-robed figure who walked out of the shadows not far away. "Lord Harvey, greetings to the deacon of the Judicial Academy." The other knights saw this and quickly got up to salute and greet. Yes, the black-robed figure approached. It was a stern old man with a slightly dark complexion. His expression was stiff, like a black rock that had never been eroded by the wind. As he passed by the bonfire, he paused for a while and said coldly, "Keep a good night watch. Don't say things that you shouldn't say, and don't meddle in things that you shouldn't meddle in." With that, he walked straight to the small yellow tent not far away. Obviously, the conversation between the knights had reached his ears. "Yes, sir." Although it was a cold winter night, the knights' foreheads were instantly covered in cold sweat. They replied in a trembling voice. Perhaps it was because the court had accumulated a lot of power in the past. With a soft snort, Harvey, who had walked to the door of the tent, naturally did not have the time to pay attention to these low-level knights. He stretched out his hand to lift the curtain and stepped in. The interior of the tent was not large, and the decorations were very simple. There was a simple table, a dim oil lamp, a bowl of water, and a figure sitting cross-legged behind the table. That was all. Although he was a prisoner, there were no external shackles or ropes on his body. Of course, those things were useless to her. "What do you think, Madame Sylvia?" Harvey stopped 10 feet away from the wooden table and asked in a low voice. She did not respond, nor did she raise her head, as if she was disdainful. However, Harvey was not surprised and continued to say, "In fact, your luck is really good. This time, the temple will carry out a comprehensive purge of the Puritans who caused the civil strife. This decision has already been made. As long as you are caught, 8 or 9 out of 10 of you will be punished by God. You will be punished by fire, and your soul will not be able to return to the Father's paradise. And you, your crime is the most serious, and you have long been on the top of the purge list. But you are very lucky. The child of Cardinal Simon took a fancy to you and was willing to vouch for you. To be honest, this can be regarded as the Father's kindness. What do you think?" "I feel disgusted." A slightly weak tone drew out an iron will that was as immovable as a mountain. She slowly raised her head, and her movements seemed to be sluggish due to the effort. Her face was pale, and her lips were dry and tightly pursed. Only a pair of firm eyes were shining, unusually bright. She was indeed one of the 12 holy knight commanders of the temple, Sylvia with the reputation of the knight's flower. "Well, I also feel disgusted." Nodding, Harvey's cold face did not change in the slightest. In the face of God's punishment, everyone should be equal. But because you have a beautiful face, you have the opportunity to escape punishment. I have to say, this is a great irony to my duty. I am not guilty. Slightly pursing her lips, Sylvia said seriously, "That is not up to you to decide, and in my opinion, Madame Sylvia is indeed guilty." Harvey said in a rigid and calm manner, "I have heard of some of your actions. You think you are on the side of the believers, but you do not know that you have betrayed the will of God. You have messed up the reputation of the temple, and you have also joined forces with the Puritans to create chaos within the temple. From this point of view, you are indeed no different from an evil heretic. And this is what it means to be in a different position, and their opinions will not be the same. There's almost no possibility of reconciling this contradiction. Harris took a step forward and took out a crystal ball that was glowing with a faint green light. He placed it on the wooden table and said, "Lady Xiao Weian must recognize this." That's right. This is the magic tool used to determine whether a woman is a virgin or not. It's called the Jade Crystal Ball. Seeing this, Sylvia's body suddenly tensed up. Of course, she knew this thing, and don't listen to the name of this magic tool. In fact, this is a tool made by a dark mage. Some evil spells are cast with very strange materials, and even the blood of virgins is needed, and this thing is needed to identify them. Under Sylvia's spear, countless evil heretics have died, so she is not unfamiliar with this kind of thing. Raising her head, her eyes were sharp like knives, and she stared at Harvey. It can be seen that if Sylvia still has the strength, she would immediately wave her hand and send this jade crystal ball flying. Unfortunately, she does not, and it is impossible for her to do so. With her strength, if she does not have a perfect confinement method, Harvey may not dare to approach her. Don't look at me like that. You know, with my duty, it is not difficult to find this thing. Or, are you nervous? Leaning over, squinting his eyes, Harvey pointed to the crystal ball on the table. Look, it doesn't have any reaction. Why? The Flower of Nights, who boasted that she has completely dedicated her body and mind to the glory of the Father, can't make the jade crystal ball emit the red light that a virgin body should have. Interesting. Can you explain, Madam Sylvia? Sylvia was silent, looking stunned. Harvey said again, "As far as I know, Madam Sylvia does not have a lover. Moreover, with Milord's reputation, if that lover was in the temple, it would be impossible for him to hide. Then, wouldn't there be evidence that the reputable Milord Xiao Weian colluded with the evil heretics? This speculation is a bit far-fetched. If it is not a person in the temple, will he be an evil heretic? However, Sylvia can't refute this. What can she say? Am I being forced? Of course, this chain of evidence is very fragile and cannot stand up to scrutiny. But now the situation has changed. Harvey straightened his body, shook his head, and said, "I just received news not long ago that Madam will not be sent to the temple headquarters for trial, but in a city in Bran, in front of thousands of people, she will be punished by fire." After a pause, he looked at Sylvia, who frowned slightly, and continued, "Is it strange? I also find it strange. This is not in line with the usual trial process. I heard that it was the idea of a great noble in the Bran Palace." Well, it seems that Madam has offended a lot of people, and they can't wait to kill you. In short, the temple headquarters did not refuse, so Madam's ending is set. In order to create a trial atmosphere in front of thousands of people, it is necessary to publicize Madam's guilt. For example, the temple is in chaos or disregarding the identity of a clergyman, colluding with evil heretics in private, or even becoming a prostitute. He spread his hands. See, it's that simple. The evidence that Madam is not a virgin is also confirmed. Sylvia pursed her lips and did not refute, nor was she agitated to seek justice. She continued to hang her head in silence, as if she was thinking about something. She was not thinking about who was in a hurry to kill her, but she was a little regretful and sad. She originally planned to debate with the Pope face to face in the court of justice. She really wanted to know whether she was wrong or the temple's decision was wrong. But unfortunately, the temple headquarters did not seem to intend to give her this opportunity. Harvey glanced over and thought that the dejected expression on Xiao Weian's face was because she was regretting her fate. A hint of joy flashed across his eyes, and he became more confident in his next persuasion. Of course, it's still the same sentence. Madam, you are really lucky to have met someone who can save your fate. Oh, of course, this is not referring to those traitors like Owens who are still thinking of rescuing you. Although they successfully destroyed the long-distance transmission array that directly returned to the temple headquarters, that's all. This is not the chaotic North. No matter what they plan to do next, it's impossible to succeed. Madam, you are lucky to have met me and Archbishop Simonschild. Currently, I am the only one who knows that Madam is not a virgin. I will not release this news, let alone tell Archbishop Simon's child. So now, as long as Madam agrees, Archbishop Simon will have an excuse to intervene in this matter. He will protect his future granddaughter-in-law. And Madam, you will still be one of the 12 Holy Knight Commanders, the flower of knights with an outstanding reputation. I will also go one step further and become the Deputy Dean of the Court of Justice, second only to the Pope. After a pause, he silently added the last sentence in his heart. Thinking of Archbishop Simon's subtle hint, Harvey could not help but slightly raise the corner of his mouth. For the first time, his rigid face squeezed out a few scary smiles. And then he asked, "Madam, do you understand what I said?" "Understood." Sylvia narrowed her eyes and looked up at Harvey, who was almost unable to hide his excitement. She pursed her lips into a mocking smile. "You make me feel even more disgusted." Chapter 9:35. Rumors were like a river. The source of the rumor was extremely narrow, and the downstream became wider and wider. The news that Sylvia was captured by the Divine Hall's own people in the north was not known to the public. It was only spread among the upper class in the capital of Bran. It couldn't be helped. As the temple's main force in eliminating evil from the outside world, the temple's 12 Holy Knight Commanders enjoyed a great reputation among the people. As the only female among them, Sylvia, who had the reputation of being the flower of knights, had an even more outstanding reputation. Now that they had suddenly decided to put him on trial in front of tens of thousands of people, it was undoubtedly impossible for them to simply make an appearance. At that time, the trial platform would probably be overturned by the angry citizens. As such, if they wanted to proceed with the trial smoothly, they would have to first damage Sylvia's reputation to the lowest point. Therefore, after the initial failure of a negotiation, almost overnight, all sorts of rumors about Sylvia began to spread, harboring evil intentions and shaking the stability of the temple, to fall into depravity and associate with evil heretics. The saintess, who was like a flower of knights, had long been corrupted and degenerated into a nightingale. All kinds of rumors were spreading like thunder behind the dark clouds, or like a storm suddenly condensing on the surface of the sea, causing a huge uproar. They were indeed worthy of being a sect that relied on propaganda. They were completely familiar with this method. In just a short period of time, they spread this kind of explosive rumor on a large scale. In fact, if the people were rational, they would know at a glance that this situation, which was obviously carefully planned to form such a large-scale situation, was not normal. However, there was an old saying that went, "A rumor 1,000 times is the truth." Although some words were hurtful, for example, no matter which world one was in, most people were much more ignorant than one would imagine. However, this was probably the truth. It was also the reason why Rosa had paid so much attention to Tang An's big character poster publicity plan. When the seemingly reasonable rumors ravaged the people's auditory and visual nerves over and over again, the people's views gradually changed from the previous shock and disbelief to the dubious. Then, a small number of people believed it. They felt that they had been deceived. They began to be angry and began to curse. Emotions were the most contagious. Therefore, the direction of public opinion gradually changed. More and more people joined in. They despised and cursed at the pure flower of knights that they had admired and admired in their hearts. Of course, there was another important factor. The South was different from the North. The believers here had not experienced the dark times of the believers in the North. They were still willing to believe in the integrity of the temple, and their faith could be said to be stable. Now that the rumors about Sylvia were spreading like wildfire, the temple had no intention of explaining anything. This undoubtedly made the public believe that Sylvia had fallen even more. So far, in just a few days, the flower of knights with outstanding reputation had gradually withered. Songhai City, Allen's Manor, a grassland by a small lake. No way. You snuck all the way here from the capital and did not hesitate to use your family's connections to owe a favor, just to sow rumors here. On a wooden bench, Philip, who was dressed casually, widened his eyes. He looked at his grandfather's most talented disciple, Winston, who had suddenly appeared in front of him. He asked curiously, "How much hatred do you have with Sylvia?" "Of course not. This is only the second step." Leaning on the bench in a rather comfortable posture, Winston looked at the large grassland in front of him, the clear lake surrounding it, and the faintly discernible garden in the distance. He nodded and praised, "Not a bad manner. It seems that the Yatong Business Group, which is rumored to have accumulated wealth comparable to 10 generations of nobles in just a few years, really lives up to its reputation." In addition to his identity as the disciple of the God of Swords, Winston was also from a famous family. His family had great influence in the capital's palace. Naturally, he could see the high value of this exquisite manor in front of him. However, Philip's focus was obviously not on the latter. Although the imperial capital's flower wolf had a reputation, it did not mean that Philip was a good-for-nothing. From a certain perspective, he and Winston were the same type of people. They were both well-known figures among the younger generation of the great noble families in the capital of Bran. He was also very clear about how people like them did things. Now that Winston had suddenly appeared in front of him, he immediately felt that he had been set up. He frowned slightly. The second step? So, there must be a first step and a last step? There's no need to be so vigilant. In any case, I'm your grandfather's last disciple. The relationship between our families is not shallow. Stop it. Answer the question. Winston shook his head. All right, there's no harm in telling you. This time, I'm here for that Tangan. The so-called first step is naturally for you to find the Josiah family and the chairman of the Yadong Business Group, Alan. With them around, that Tangan will definitely come. As expected, Philip's face instantly darkened. You're not welcome here. I'm the person in charge of this arrest operation. If you don't want me to write a letter to Brother Haida, then immediately take your people back. Don't scare me. I think you know very well about that Tang An's true identity. Perhaps Master and Brother Haida want me to kill him. Winston's expression did not change. He pointed at Alan, who was walking with Annika by the lake in the distance, and smiled casually. I know you have a good relationship with that Tang In. The operation you're in charge of this time is called an arrest, but it's actually protection. Other than your people, no one knows that the chairman of the Yatong Business Group is colluding with the Gray Coat rebels. They also don't know that the rebel leader's family is hiding here. The excuse you came up with is not bad. To please the future wife's father and mother. Look, everyone has been successfully deceived by you. Bullshit. I'm being sincere. Cough, cough. Philip cleared his throat and frowned. Are you threatening me? No, we're both taking what we need. Winston spread out his hands and said, I have no objections to you protecting these people, and I'll even help you cover it up. Look, I'd rather make a move on that Sylvia, who's only friends with Tang In, than use Alan and Josiah's family members, who are more effective. I'd rather spread the news to draw out Tang In. This is enough to show my sincerity, isn't it? Waving his hand, Philip was surprised. Wait, that Knight's Flower is friends with Tang In? Winston nodded. You don't know? Master said so it shouldn't be wrong. That's why I spent so much effort to intercept that Sylvia and rescheduled it to a public trial in Songhai City in a few days. With the current publicity, even if that Tang Un is in the north, he should have enough time to get here. When the time comes, you can take this Alan to the trial site to take a look. He'll definitely appear. Philip? Philip. Dazed, he muttered in a low voice. Damn, that doesn't make sense. I'm clearly much more handsome than him. So how come he beat Josiah and Sylvia to them? The corner of his mouth twitched, and Winston forcibly resisted the urge to curse out loud. He only felt that it was stupid of him to waste his time explaining things to this womanizer. Taking a deep breath, he stood up. I've said what needs to be said, so let's leave it at that. You protect his people, and I'll wait for that Tangan to come. We won't interfere with each other. Sure. However, you've only been defeated once. Is there need to make such a big scene? Philip raised his head and asked from behind. You won't understand. Just like how Master is the invincible sword god, as a disciple, I naturally can't embarrass him in the younger generation. When Sillin stopped in his tracks and narrowed his eyes as he looked at Alan, who was walking over from afar. Just like how Master is the invincible sword god, as a disciple, I naturally can't embarrass him in the younger generation. If you're jealous, just say it. As far as I know, that old man of mine isn't someone who's afraid of being embarrassed. Curling his lips disapprovingly, Philip mercilessly exposed Winston's true intentions. Maybe. Winston naturally couldn't be angry with Philip. A few glimmers of light flashed in his eyes, and he said firmly, "Anyway, after this time, there will no longer be a Tang in this world. Is that so?" Philip smiled faintly. "Although I'm not strong enough, don't blame me for not reminding you. He's someone that even my old man praises. Compared to him, you, as his disciple, are really inferior." Pause for a while. His mocking smile became even more obvious. "I'm very curious. Where did you get your confidence from? Or did you find some lackey?" Hearing this, Winston suddenly clenched his fists, and his body stiffened a little. After a moment, he exhaled lightly and walked away without looking back. "Don't provoke me. When the time comes, you'll know where my confidence comes from. I'll wait and see." "Philip, this is—" Alan, who was walking over, couldn't help but ask when he saw Winston, who had an unapproachable temperament, leave with a gloomy expression. "It's a guy who was once taught a lesson by your master and now wants to get back at him. In general, he's a boring guy. Don't worry about him." Shaking his head, Philip put away his confident expression and said with a frown, "Alan, are you sure you can't contact Tangin now?" Alan was stunned when he heard this. He looked at Philip, who had a solemn expression, and shook his head lightly. "Master is worried that my identity will be exposed, so all this time, unless I go to the north to look for him in person, he's only occasionally sent someone to deliver letters. Other than that, there's no other contact." This was the truth. After spending a few days together, Alan had some guesses about this uninvited friend of his, Philip. He really didn't seem to have any ill intentions. This was based on evidence. At first, Alan thought that the other party would capture him and Josiah's family members to the capital of Bran. At the very least, they would be sent to the city's prison. He didn't expect that as Tangin's friend, he would be merciful. As long as he didn't torture them severely, it would be fine. But in the end, since they arrived, the other party had been staying here and didn't leave. 2 days ago, he went to a secret place on time to greet Josiah's elders. Recently, he seemed to have hooked up with the daughter of a rich businessman who lived in a nearby manor. This made Annika a little confused. She vaguely asked if he was a poor relative or something. That's troublesome. Philip suddenly frowned when he heard this. "With my understanding of Tangin, he will definitely come to save you. I originally planned to stay here for a few days and wait for him to come over so that we could have a drink and part on good terms. But now, the situation is a little out of control." Alan was not a fool. Hearing this, he looked at Winston, who was about to disappear into the distance, and raised his eyebrows. "Because of him?" "Yes." Philip nodded weakly. "He's my old man, the last disciple of the God of Swords. There's nothing to say about his talent, but he's a little petty. This time, since he's determined to make trouble for Tangin, he must have brought a lot of masters with him. Sai, this matter is getting out of hand." Chapter 9:36. After the conversation in the manor, the plan was officially formed with the safety of Alan and Josiah's families as the starting point, and with Sylvia as the bait and Songhai City as the location. Winston, Philip, and the others, who were in control and spectators, had different plans. Some were expectant, some were worried, but in reality, Tangin had arrived earlier than everyone had imagined. As the escort team from the temple slowly approached, and as various rumors about Sylvia were still brewing and spreading in the market, Tangin had already arrived at Songhai City with Misho and the others. Tangin had come with the intention of rescuing Alan, but he had not expected that Winston would also be involved in the matter of Sylvia. It had been a choice between two, but in the end, it was different routes leading to the same destination. It was a pity that the affairs of the world were unpredictable. It was still Alan's manor, at the outer street corner. "Boss, there's something strange without the secret organization to investigate on their behalf." Tang In and the others, who had just arrived, naturally had to investigate in person. With their insight, the manor's loose exterior and tight interior security could easily be seen through. However, this was also what Michaud had said was strange. After all, according to their previous information, the brand officials had found this place a few days ago. Logically speaking, they should have captured Alan and the others and taken them to the capital. In fact, the reason why Tang In and the others had come here was to inquire about information. They wanted to know when the other party had left, which route they had taken, and so on. However, looking at the situation in front of them, it seemed that the other party had not left yet. What kind of game was this? Rubbing his chin, Tang In could not see through it. He thought to himself, could it be that Alan would rather die than submit and did not confess the hiding place of Josiah's family? So they were wasting their time here? Thinking of this, Tang Un's heart suddenly moved. When he raised his head to look at the manor again, his eyes seemed to be covered by a faint layer of nebula, churning endlessly, appearing distant and mysterious. Aura observation. See through mountains and rivers, gain insight into all things. This was a skill in the system's skill tree that dealt with layout. However, with a single glance, he was able to take in the surrounding environment and find the most suitable place to assassinate in the shortest amount of time. He could also vaguely sense the strength, danger, and so on of the target in an instant. It was the mysterious and subtle thing mentioned by the old butler. It was also the feudal superstition that Tang In thought when he first saw it. Well, it turned out that this skill was not superstitious. It was just that for the current Tang In, it was a little useless. The defense isn't that tight. Should I send someone in to investigate? Michaud asked in a low voice. He was also sizing up the manor with narrowed eyes, secretly estimating the degree of defense here. He shook his head. Let's wait a little longer. Contact the secret agency personnel who followed us here and see if they have any information worth paying attention to. He paused. Be careful. It's not that simple. Tang In, who had already used his aura divination skill to observe the exterior of the manor, could vaguely detect several strong waves of power. He knew that the manor's defense wasn't as simple as it seemed. At the same time, he couldn't help but mutter in his heart, wondering if this was a trap waiting for him to walk into it. In fact, Tang In's guess was not far from the real situation. Although when Sillin didn't expect Tang In to come so quickly, he knew very well that no matter when Tang In came, Alan and the others would be the targets of his rescue. Therefore, he had secretly arranged for masters to guard them. Tang In wasn't afraid of masters, but the work of saving people was about finishing the job in one fell swoop. He was afraid that if he accidentally left a few people out, the other party would use it against him. That would be troublesome. Josiah's family had a lot of people, so Tang In had to be careful. Looking left and right, there would not be any movement here for a while. Just as Tang In was about to retreat and investigate further, he suddenly saw a luxurious carriage slowly drive out of the manor's side door. Then, it stopped slightly at the main door and picked up a tall figure. Hey, this is Annika? After thinking for a while, Tang In quickly recognized the identity of this young woman who was somewhat similar to Lena. She was the lover that Alan had once brought to the north. He couldn't help but be startled, and his heart was filled with doubts. Cha, how could they capture people like this? They didn't restrict personal freedom. Before Tang In could recover, the luxurious carriage carrying Annika had already sped away from the corner in front of him. Without thinking too much, Tang In gave Michaud a look. The latter nodded knowingly and made a gesture. The figure sitting on the bench, not far away, nodded lightly, got up, closed the newspaper in his hand, and followed from afar. Although he had met Annika once, the current situation was too strange. Tang In naturally couldn't appear rashly to meet her. It was undoubtedly the safest to send someone to follow and check the situation first. Let's go retreat first. A moment later, East City District. Sister Betsy, this is the official cooperation document between the business group and your family. Take a look. If you don't have any objections, it will be effective immediately with the family seal. Handing over a thin stack of paper, Annika picked up the honey water on the table and sat up straight, looking like a strong businesswoman. However, her slightly squinted eyes and slightly curled lips contained the meaning of praise me a little bit spoiled the atmosphere a little. If it was any other time, the true businesswoman Betsy would have easily seen through Annika's hidden smugness. Not to mention the friendship between them. Even if it was because of the high value of this cooperation agreement, she would still flatter Annika a little bit. But now, Betsy, who had been in a daze since they met, only subconsciously took the cooperation document and flipped through a few pages without any other expression. Annika couldn't help but pout when she saw this, and she dragged out her tone with dissatisfaction. Betsy, sister, Oh, haha, thank you, our little president. This time it's all thanks to you. After being stunned for a moment, Betsy quickly reacted and praised with a smile. She then rubbed her forehead and shook her head apologetically. Sorry, this sister's mental state has been a little bad these few days. Hee, it's nothing. This is what good sisters should do. Annika's expression instantly brightened up. The noble and spoiled Annika was easy to coax, but then she asked worriedly, Sister Betsy, are you okay? Are you sick? She paused, as if she thought of something, or are you still thinking about that portrait? It's nothing. Maybe it's because I'm tired from staying up late these few days. That portrait? Of course not. Perfectly stunned, Betsy raised her hand to tuck a few strands of hair behind her ear and asked seemingly casually, But since this is brought up, do you remember where you saw him? Annika didn't suspect her, but shook her head. Sorry, Sister Betsy. I've been thinking about it these few days, but I really can't remember. Her arm trembled slightly. It's nothing. It's fine if you can't remember. That person's appearance is really hard to remember. Waving the contract in her hand, Betsy smiled and said, Let's talk about Alan. When you have time, help me ask him out. I should thank him properly. Don't mention him. Oh, what's wrong with you guys? Sister Betsy, this time it's really not my fault. Annika said indignantly. These few days Alan has been strange. He doesn't talk to me. That's right. It's because of what I mentioned to you before. After Philip's friend came, Alan changed. Today, I clearly heard the two of them talking about the trial 2 days later. I didn't want to go, so I casually mentioned it. But Alan scolded me on the spot and said he would never take me. Don't you think this is infuriating? Is a fiancé more important? Or is a friend more important? I've decided I'll ignore him these few days. Rubbing her forehead, Betsy helplessly sighed. You're jealous of a friend? He's a guy. Annika. Sister Betsy, what are you thinking? I didn't mean that. Anyways, he just doesn't care about me. Annika angrily flung her hair. If you don't want me to go, I won't go. No, Sister Betsy, I'll go back and find out more about the trial. Then you can take me there. That's a good idea. It's decided. I want to see where these two men will go. That Philip guy isn't a good person. Don't lead my Alan astray. Come on, are you angry with Alan? Or do you care about Alan? Listening to the chaotic words, Becky finally understood what was going on. Either Annika was in a state of anxiety before getting married, or she was openly showing off her love for each other, while later in a small tavern in the city. If that's the case, Annika doesn't seem to know what happened. She just went to meet a friend. And from what she said, the main point should be the trial 2 days later. Do you know what the trial is about? Sorry, boss. The gray space member who went to find out the news shook his head apologetically. I was a little far away at that time, so I only heard the gist of it. When I got closer, they were talking about something like public displays of affection, and it was a mess, so Tangen didn't mind and waved his hand. It's okay, it's not your fault. He suddenly paused and lowered his hand, leaning sideways to listen to something. The tavern's business was good. It was almost full. The bustling crowd just happened to cover the conversation of Tang In and the others in the corner. But just now, Tang In had sensitively caught the word trial. I really didn't expect it, the flower of nights, to think I had a good impression of her before. Who didn't? My son almost went crazy when he heard the news. He couldn't believe it. Sigh, you can't judge a book by its cover. You can't not believe it. I heard she will be punished by fire in a few days, and the trial location seems to be near our city. It can't be our Songhai city, right? No matter where it is. Anyway, I still don't believe it. The Flower of Nights? Wasn't that Sylvia? She was going to be judged here. After summarizing the few sentences, Tang In was stunned. Could it be that this trial was going to be Sylvia's trial? That didn't make sense. With her status, even if she was convicted, she would have to go through the motions and at least make a trip to the temple headquarters. Why was it suddenly changed to here and directly executed by fire? He had to admit that Tangen's mind was in a mess at this moment. Previously, he had chosen to save Alan because it was the most rational choice. But at the same time, there were some other thoughts mixed in. According to the time, the team escorting Sylvia had arrived in the south at about the same time as them. In other words, as long as he could quickly solve the problem here, he would still have time to consider whether to save Sylvia or not. But now, these two matters seem to be coming together. Could it be that God also wants me to save her? But then again, why should I save this violent woman who always goes against me? While Tang In was at a loss, the discussion on the other side seemed to be showing signs of an argument, and the anger was growing. Young man, it doesn't matter if you don't believe it. Haven't you heard? That Sylvia is no longer the original Flower of Nights. She has fallen, and has mixed with evil heretics. Banging on the table, there was a loud bang. Fall my ass. How many evil heretics did Lady Sylvia kill before? How could she be in the same league as these filthy things? If anyone were to fall, it would be you people who gossip behind her back. Filthy things? Tangen's eyebrows twitched, and he was speechless. TCH, you can quarrel, but don't let others be implicated, okay? Be more polite when you speak to me. Why is it impossible? The doctrine says that people who often come into contact with demons are not far from hell. It's true that she has killed many evil heretics, but perhaps because of this, she's been tainted by evil blood. Banging on the table again. Bullsh asterisk T. How can evil heretics be compared to Lady Sylvia? F asterisk CK. Brainless fan? I can't be bothered with you. Rubbing his nose, Tang In secretly curled his lips and raised the wine jug rather gloomily. Similarly, he banged on the table angrily. F asterisk CK. Can't be mentioned in the same league? Haha, what do you know? That Sylvia has been tainted by evil heretics, haven't you heard? She is now a whore. Who knows how many evil heretics have? Before the sarcastic voice died away, suddenly, with a bang, the wine jug shattered into pieces in Tang In's palm, and the wine spilled all over the table. After a pause, the main hall of the small tavern suddenly fell silent for a moment because of the explosion, and many people subconsciously gathered their gazes. Letting out a long breath, Tang In pushed the table and stood up, expressionlessly coming to the person who mocked him, and reached out to put his hand on the other's shoulder. Come, find a place, we need to talk. Chapter 9:37. The hustle and bustle would eventually come to an end. 2 days after the surging waves, it was noon in Songhai City. The weather wasn't very good. Although it couldn't be considered dark clouds, it was still gloomy and gloomy. There wasn't the slightest bit of sunlight, making it very gloomy and depressing. If this continued, a night rain would be inevitable. However, this didn't affect the atmosphere below. With Songhai City's southern square as the center, countless people continuously crowded in from all directions. The clamor quickly heated up the atmosphere here. It was like a grand festival, a ceremony, or the arrival of some important figure. In short, around lunchtime, more and more citizens were like fish that smelled spices, gathering here and filling every corner of the square. Anger, agitation, suspicion, as well as expressions that were slightly distorted due to the faint excitement. Each and every one of their faces had different expressions. Of course, most of them looked like they were here to watch a show, with faint excitement and indifference. Looking from the periphery of the square, In the middle of the increasingly lively sea of people, there was a tall statue of a dark-skinned old man holding a code of law in one hand and a hammer in the other. If they guessed correctly, this should be a famous person in Songhai City who had been a judge in his lifetime, which was why the citizens had made a statue to commemorate him. Of course, this wasn't the main point. The main point was that below the statue of the judge, there was a simple man-made platform. On top of it was a black and brown log, and the surroundings were covered with dry wood and branches. Around the platform, large groups of garrison cavalry had already rushed over and were maintaining order. They shouted angrily and drove the crowd back to make room for the statue. But even so, there were still countless busybodies who peeked inside from the shoulders of the cavalrymen, the gaps between the cavalrymen, or under the spears. Then they turned their heads and shouted what they saw to the back, as if it was a live broadcast. "It's all wood, it's all wood. When it's lit, that depraved woman will definitely burn up along with the platform. Are you sure it's a fire?" This troublesome child cried and insisted on coming with me to take a look. "It's good that it's a fire. Once there's smoke, you can't see anything, and there's no blood. What a pity. I heard that woman is rather pretty. Isn't she nicknamed the Flower of Nights? In the end, she's going to be burned to death. What's there to pity? Evil heretics should be burned. Yes, but why hasn't she come yet? Don't tell me it's canceled. Impossible. Wait a little longer. Soon. What a magnificent and cruel scene. Even though they knew that people would be burned to death here, there were still so many people who came to watch. Oh, there's even a family. What psychology? Even in the South City, which was marked by the slums, the crowded square was also a bustling commercial area. Many high-rise shops and lofts were erected around it. Now, in the east of the square, Philip stuck his head out of the floor-to-ceiling window of the three-story clothing store. He looked down at the square and couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. "You're just here to watch a good show." Ellen stood quietly at the side and watched coldly. She looked at the daughter of the rich neighbor, the young woman who was hugging Philip's arm with a face full of shock. The corners of her mouth curled slightly. "However, it seems that you also brought your family here." This is different. I was forced. I can't help it if she wants to follow me out of curiosity." "Oh dear, I was wrong. I invited you here on purpose." Don't pinch me. The half of his body that was sticking out of the window shivered and retracted instantly. Philip comforted the young daughter of the rich businessman rather awkwardly and persuaded her to let go. Then, he turned his head to look at Winston, who was scanning the crowd below with narrowed eyes. "I say, if Tangen doesn't show up today, what do you plan to do?" "Then I'll watch a good show and continue to wait." As if he didn't notice anything unusual, Winston retracted his gaze and glanced at Allen. "Of course, I may have to ask President Allen to help me invite him when the time comes." Allen's expression didn't change. He wasn't angry, and he wasn't surprised. After all, since he was already a captive, he had to have the consciousness of a captive. However, Philip narrowed his eyes when he heard this. "I seem to have said that Allen is my friend." I'll definitely take care of your friend." "Then, how about we ask the elders of Josiah's family to come forward?" With a chuckle, Winston said casually, "Choose one of the two. Since I'm already here, you can't let me go back empty-handed, right?" "I don't mind." Philip turned his head to look out of the window. He put away his usual cheeky smile and said calmly, "Winston, don't try to cross my bottom line." Winston looked at Philip in surprise when he heard this, as if he was meeting him for the first time. He then nodded. "I understand. If everything goes well, I don't want to do that either. Well, actually, I've always been a little curious. You should be very clear about the relationship between Bran and the Grey Coat Army. Even if he has master support, isn't it a little too much for you to be so blatantly biased?" Don't tell me it's because of that, Josiah. As far as I know, that's your friend Tangen's woman." He waved his hand. "What do you mean by yours or his?" "As long as it's a beautiful woman, she's my potential lover." "Ahem, I'm just saying." Looking at Allen's suddenly knife-like gaze, Philip coughed slightly awkwardly. His gaze was a little erratic, but he just happened to meet the suspicious gaze of the rich merchant's little daughter not far away. He could only look at Winston with his body tensed up. I'm very clear about the relationship between Bran and the Grey Coat Army. Perhaps you don't know, but the Grey Coat Army has worked with us before. At that time, we got along quite well. Moreover, you're right. I'm indeed friends with Tang Yen. Then, since this matter has been handed over to me, it's only right to help a friend, isn't it? Us. Winston sensitively caught the difference in the partners in Philip's words. It's us, not Bran. He raised his eyebrows. You're talking about the new nobles. Could it be that you're still working with the Grey Coat Army? Winston, who was originally from a great noble family, was not very concerned about the family's affairs, even though he was under Wu Ding's tutelage. However, the two main factions in the palace, the old nobles and the new nobles, were naturally aware of it. They also knew that Philip had a good relationship with His Royal Highness the Second Prince and was drifting among the new nobles. What a joke. Even if we're willing, the Grey Coat Army of the dead leader Lo Sha won't be willing. Philip shook his head speechlessly. It's just forming good karma. After all, who knows what will happen in the future? It's always good to have an extra route of retreat. Route of retreat? What route of retreat? This time, it was Winston's turn to be speechless. He looked at Philip as if he was looking at a lunatic. Could it be that you new nobles think that the Grey Coat Army can defeat Bran? Ha, I didn't say that. But you can't deny that this is also a possibility, isn't it? Moreover, I've realized that you've all underestimated the true strength of the Grey Coat Army. This is not an opponent that can be easily defeated as long as you're serious. At the moment when the northern wilderness tribes are about to invade the border, the existence of the Grey Coat Army cannot be underestimated. If we're not careful, it's hard to say what kind of commotion it will cause. Perhaps you're right. The Grey Coat Army can't defeat Bran. But if at a critical moment, the Grey Coat Army and Bran are in a stalemate, then these accumulated good karma will be an opportunity for negotiation. Of course, these are all hypotheses. Just treat it as if I'm joking. You just need to understand one thing, and that is that my help this time is not entirely out of selfishness. After a moment of silence, Winston still shook his head in disbelief. I still think that you new aristocrats are crazy. There's actually someone who thinks highly of the Grey Coat Army. I'm definitely going to kill Tang in this time. Your plan is destined to be a castle in the air. I've already said that this is a matter for the future. It's boring to talk about it now. And, although from a personal point of view, I'm very pessimistic about your plan this time. But if you can really kill Tang In, then you'll really be doing Bran a big favor. Philip shrugged and said calmly, Do you think that no one knows that you've secretly brought an expert over from the capital this time? I'm sure that my old man definitely knows about it. And he also doesn't think highly of you. He just wants you to come over and try. If you succeed, it'll be a surprise. But if you don't, it'll be normal. Anyway, for the sake of the Sword God, you probably won't die. Learning a lesson is also a gain. So, after a pause, he patted Winston's shoulder, who looked as if he had seen a ghost. Relax. As soon as he finished speaking, with a whoosh, the square outside the window suddenly became lively. Waves of noise rolled, and the slightly gloomy and cold atmosphere seemed to have instantly raised the temperature by a little. Oh, are they here? In the distance, a large group of cavalry in silver-white armor was like a sharp sword out of its scabbard. They directly split the boiling sea of people and slowly came over. P.S. I hesitated for a moment, but still wrote this chapter. The Civet Cat knows that it will look a little boring and a little baffling. But this is a necessary foreshadowing, and I really can't save the ink. Chapter 9:38. Just as the three of them were scheming against each other by the window, on the second floor of the restaurant on the north side of the square, a pair of eyes peeked at them. What? So he's here to watch the trial. I had to disguise myself for so long. Anika, who was fully wrapped up, pouted and mumbled in dissatisfaction. I already said that Alan isn't that kind of person. You're worried for nothing. Betsy, who was pulled along by Anika, shook her head with a smile. She took off her wide-brimmed hat, waved to the waiter nearby, and ordered 2 drinks. Then I'll have to keep an eye on him. Sister Becky, you don't know. Did you see that person with a wretched smile? The one standing on Alan's left. He's Philip, who's been hanging around our house for the past few days. Anika pointed to the 3rd floor of the Oriental clothing store with a look of disdain. Alan has a lot of friends, but he's the only bad one. Do you see that woman standing beside him? She's the daughter of our neighbor's rich merchant. She's usually a proud person, but she's been seduced by Philip in just a few days. Pervert, playboy, shameless. A woman's intuition was terrifyingly accurate. If Alan wasn't here, he would definitely agree with his fiancée's judgment. Pervert? Philip. Betsy, who had a wide range of friends because she was in charge of family affairs, raised her eyebrows. She seemed to have thought of something, and her expression turned strange. But then she shook her head and murmured, "It shouldn't be him. He's active in a capital." What? Oh, nothing. I suddenly thought of someone. After a pause, Betsy said, "Anika, you're also a noble. You should have heard of the Imperial Flower Wolf, right? I heard that his name is Philip, and he's from a prominent family. I've heard of it, but it's definitely not him." Hearing this, Anika shook her head and denied it without thinking. Although his habits are similar, he doesn't have any noble aura from head to toe. How could he be from a prominent family? However, men are all the same. They're all bad. Although her words weren't polite, Anika's words made sense. As long as one was born in a large family and had been in that circle for a long time, one would be able to tell at a glance whether or not one was a noble. Those with good eyesight could even roughly determine the level of the noble families. Annie's eyesight was limited, and she hadn't reached that level yet. But as a noble, if Philip was really of the same class, Anika believed that she would be able to recognize him. However, the reality was that Philip, who had always presented himself as a sloppy person, was far from the elegant temperament of a noble. Of course, this was inevitable. This was mainly because Philip's target this time was the daughter of a wealthy merchant and not a proper noble lady. Otherwise, Anika would have been able to see what a prominent family was capable of when it came to picking up girls. Betsy nodded and didn't mind. Then it shouldn't be him, Before she could finish her sentence, there was an uproar outside the window. The deafening sound directly drowned out Betsy's words. Even Anika couldn't hear it clearly. Startled, the two of them subconsciously turned to look at the square outside the window. Very quickly, they found the center of the uproar. It was a group of temple knights wearing bright silver armor. After a moment, Anika licked her lips and looked dazed. "Sister Betsy, she's so pitiful." From the looks of it, Sylvia's current situation was indeed pitiful. The temple knights officially entered the square from the north. The Radiant Light Knights did their best to open a path in the sea of people. Following closely behind, a wooden prisoner carriage slowly moved forward. The prisoner carriage's structure was extremely simple. Other than the surrounding wooden frame, there was nothing to hide. Everyone's gazes converged and could easily see a tall, white figure sitting cross-legged in the prisoner carriage. This figure, dressed in white, didn't look dejected like an ordinary criminal parading through the streets. Instead, his shoulders and back were straight, like a sharp sword peak piercing through the sky. His long hair was slightly messy because he didn't care about it, but it was obvious that the owner had deliberately pulled it back. His face was bare, revealing a slightly pale but determined face. It was precisely because of this that the tens of thousands of people who had been waiting for a long time instantly recognized the identity of the person in the prisoner carriage and couldn't help but exclaim. The suspicion and disbelief from before were swept away. This was indeed one of the temple's 12 holy knight commanders, the Flower of Knights, Sylvia. Sylvia's expression was very calm. Her eyes looked straight ahead, like a forgotten lake in a mountain stream. She faced it directly like a mirror, without any ripples. Perhaps it was because this slightly aloof and arrogant attitude was completely different from the embarrassing scene of the holy goddess falling to the mortal world in everyone's imagination. It didn't give them the perverted pleasure that was formed by the difference. Thus, they were enraged. In an instant, the sea of people surged. "Bitch!" No one knew where the hysterical shouting came from. but it was like a fuse that instantly ignited the atmosphere in the field. Go to hell, damn evil heretic, I used to worship you. Burn her, her filthy soul can only be purified with a raging fire. What are you pretending for? Even a nightingale standing on the street is 100 times cleaner than you. Prostitute. Tens of thousands of angry faces, tens of thousands of raised fingers, and spittle flew everywhere. Countless vicious curses swept over like a tsunami, like a storm, directly pressing towards the slightly frail figure in the small prison wagon. It was certain that most of them hadn't said a word to Sylvia face to face, and they hadn't even seen her before. Or, in the past, they had loudly praised Sylvia's good deeds, praised her merits, and even secretly admired her. But now, they felt that they had been deeply deceived, although they couldn't confirm whether this deception was true or not. They also felt sincere anger, although they didn't know the source of this anger. But if the people around them were angry, then they naturally had to be angry, curse, and vent their anger. Everyone was pointing fingers at her. Sylvia's expression darkened slightly, and she pursed her lips as if she wanted to say something. But in the end, she didn't say anything. She only raised her chin slightly, hid her gloomy expression, and was as resolute as ever. But this seemed to have angered the crowd even more. Then, something was thrown from the sea of people, and it hit the wooden pillar of the prisoner carriage with a crisp sound, splashing yellow and white liquid. Some of it landed on Sylvia's white prison clothes, and it was very eye-catching. Most of it landed outside the carriage, and some even flew to the nearest citizen's mouth. She subconsciously licked it. Yes, it was an egg. As if they had been reminded, the people around the prisoner carriage instantly reacted. Thus, in the next moment, smash her to death. Eggs, potatoes, stones, all kinds of vegetables, all kinds of shoes. They all came crashing down like raindrops, and the clanging sounds of impact were incessant, drowning out most of the prisoner carriage in an instant. One could even see a mesmerizing golden parabola amidst all of this. A gold coin? Oh, it must have been thrown by some careless citizen. Now that I think about it, I really regret it. However, you get what you pay for. This gold coin, which was probably the most valuable among all of the things thrown at her, accurately passed through the gaps between the wooden pillars and quickly hit the corner of Sylvia's eye, below her brow bone. Dong! She subconsciously tilted her head, and the gold coin bounced back, then fell powerlessly and landed steadily on Sylvia's bent left leg. She lowered her head slightly, and, probably because she often played with it, the symbol of the Bran royal family could be clearly seen on the reverse side of the coin. However, in the next second, a drop of blood landed on the gold coin, and the golden symbol was instantly dyed red. Because some kind of restriction had been placed on her body, Sylvia was extremely weak at the moment. Not to mention her divine fighting power. Even her innate divine power was restricted, and she couldn't even lift her hand to clean up the debris on her body. Chapter 9:39. P.S. It's really not water. Sylvia's character is very fond of raccoons, so I spent more ink on it. That's normal, because she is Sylvia. Philip revealed everything with a single sentence. Indeed, it was Sylvia who was sitting in the prisoner's carriage. It was Sylvia who was indomitable no matter when and where she was. Even if she had to bear the crime of betrayal and be kicked out of the temple, she still wanted to know who was right and who was wrong. She was so unyielding and stubborn to the extreme, until the facts proved that her insistence was indeed wrong. Otherwise, even if she was condemned by thousands and made an enemy of tens of thousands, how could she be soft and bow her head? Sylvia did not bow her head, but Harvey could not take it anymore. The reason why he deliberately arranged for Sylvia to sit in the prisoner's carriage was that he was angry at Sylvia for blocking his future after failing to persuade her. So he wanted to teach her a lesson. The divine punishment of fire after that was the highlight of the show. He couldn't let Xia Weian die in the middle. Then, with the intervention and protection of the Temple Knights, the prisoner's carriage finally slowly passed through the sea of people, entered the area controlled by the garrison cavalry, and safely arrived at the judgment platform. At this point, the fiery atmosphere finally eased a little. Of course, this was only temporary. Everyone knew what was going to happen next. And those distorted faces with faint expectations, excitement, and other complicated expressions were all patiently and impatiently waiting for the arrival of that moment. At that time, it would be the real climax. With a creak, under the gaze of tens of thousands of people, the prisoner's carriage opened. Sylvia, with all kinds of things still hanging on her body, slowly moved her steps and walked down the carriage. Her image was inevitably a little awkward, but her expression was still as calm as water. Be careful. The unknown restriction was like heavy shackles, pressing down on Sylvia until she was extremely weak. The moment she stepped out of the carriage and stepped on the ground, her body could not help but sway. Seeing this, the young knight at the side subconsciously stepped forward and reached out to steady Sylvia's body. "Thank you." Sylvia was slightly startled. Then she gently pursed her lips and said the first sentence with a smile. "This is what I should do, my lord." The young knight was a little flustered. He immediately reached out to brush away the leaves hanging on Sylvia's shoulder. However, as soon as he stretched out his arm, it was slapped down by a palm from behind. "Captain, go back!" With a low growl and a glare at the young knight, the knight captain walked over and looked at Sylvia with an expressionless face. After a moment of silence, he straightened his body and performed a standard knight salute. Then, he stepped aside and made way for the trial platform. Sylvia nodded. She didn't show any resentment. Instead, she also expressed her gratitude. The young knight had crossed the line. Perhaps he really respected Sylvia, but the current situation was not suitable. The captain slapped his arm away, but he was actually helping him. Didn't he see Harvey's face darken? On the contrary, the captain was very experienced. A standard knight salute could be seen as a form of respect for Sylvia, but could also be understood as pity and mercy for the fallen. This was in line with the teachings of the Temple of Light. It was completely inappropriate for Harvey to take the opportunity to flare up. Perhaps they were inspired. When Sylvia walked past with difficulty, every knight of light lowered the tip of their spear, straightened their body, and performed a standard knight salute. This also made Harvey's face even gloomier. Of course, he understood the intentions of these knights, but he really couldn't say anything. He could only watch helplessly. He almost suffered internal injuries from holding it in. Without support, without guidance, without any help, Sylvia walked step by step to the trial platform. There was still a distance between the prisoner's carriage and the trial platform. This was also Harvey's bad intention. He was extremely clear about the weight of the restriction placed on Xiao Wei'an's body. He didn't want Xiao Wei'an to walk over so openly. Instead, he wanted her to be like a terrified criminal, trembling as she moved over, crawled over, or even be carried over. This was the behavior of a criminal who knew that her life was coming to an end. But Xiao Wei'an walked very steadily, her eyes looking straight ahead. Each step she took a salute. Under the contrast of the surrounding knight's salutes, the scene suddenly became a little more sacred. It didn't seem like she was walking to the judgment platform, but more like a proud general returning triumphantly to the award platform to receive the honor medal she deserved. Everyone could see that Sylvia was extremely weak now. She would fall at the slightest touch. However, everyone could feel the formless yet majestic aura that had gathered around Xiao Wei'an. It was sacred and inviolable. For a time, the noisy scene gradually quieted down. Harvey, who was standing in the field, and the thousands of people outside the field were all stunned. They only felt an indescribable force pressing on their chests. They opened their mouths blankly and couldn't speak. "This, beautiful, handsome, this is Sylvia?" Sure enough, seeing is believing. So this is King Xia Wei. And, gasping, Philip couldn't help but pat the window and stand up. He sighed repeatedly. Then his eyes lit up and he waved his arms. It's this unique feeling of standing out. I think I've really fallen in love with her. Well, to be able to change the topic of heartfelt emotion to picking up girls so naturally and freely. Philip could be considered as one of the unique ones. This unconventional compliment, full of Philip's characteristics, could be called a weirdo. But after saying it, no one objected, including Winston, who was standing at the side. He couldn't object because he was in a trance and didn't hear these words at all. His mind was wandering. Previously, except for Tang In, Winston, who was always arrogant, didn't think that there was a warrior who could compare to him in the younger generation, including Sylvia, because she was only at the peak of Earth stage and hadn't even touched the threshold of Void stage. She wasn't qualified to enter his eyes. But now, for some reason, looking at the majestic aura surrounding Sylvia, Winston suddenly faintly felt that even if he was about to cross the threshold of Void stage, if he were to have a life and death battle with this Sylvia, he was afraid that he would be the one to lose in the end. What was going on? How was it possible? Could it be that such a huge gap still couldn't determine the outcome of the battle? At this moment, Winston was extremely confused. Although the scene was silent, Sylvia still continued to move forward, and the people present had unknowingly approached the trial platform. They paused for a few moments in front of the steps and looked up at the tall statue standing behind the platform. Then they lowered their heads and bypassed the dry wood and branches, steadily stepping onto the trial platform step by step. They paused and looked at the dark brown log nailed to the center of the platform, then turned to look at the knight holding the rope in one hand and saluting with the other. Paused for a while, they asked doubtfully, not tied. Then sit down, you can't run away anyway. Shrugging, Sylvia sat cross-legged very naturally, returning to the position in the prisoner carriage. Then, she bowed slightly and slowly breathed a sigh of relief. The shackles were not fake, and Sylvia could walk steadily until here was her limit. If she didn't sit down now, she was afraid that she would really follow Harvey's instructions and make a fool of herself on the spot. At this time, the people in the field finally reacted. Thinking of the strange feeling just now, they were immediately shocked and confused, making a lot of noise. And Harvey's face instantly turned as black as the bottom of a pot, both embarrassed and angry. He was not an ordinary person who didn't know anything, but because he knew more, he was embarrassed. After all, no matter how he looked at the scene just now, it was Sylvia's imposing manner that suppressed the thousands of people in the field, including him, the presiding judge in name. The judge was actually intimidated by the subject of the trial. How big of a joke would it be if this were to spread out? Calming his mind, Harvey didn't bother to pursue the knight who refused to come forward to tie the rope. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Sylvia with resentment, saying loudly with a fake smile, "Hee, as expected of Lady Sylvia. Even if she has fallen into evil heresy, her unrepentant character still hasn't changed." This sentence could be said to be ruthless. Not only did it directly gloss over the embarrassing scene just now, but more importantly, it defined the meaning of Xia Weian's actions from the moment she entered the trial venue until now. That was, she was unrepentant. And the onlookers who had preconceived notions heard this and realized that it seemed to be the case. They were instantly enraged and echoed with a burst of curses. And seeing that the atmosphere had returned to the right track of the trial again, Harvey smiled even more and shouted in a sentencing manner. God said, "Sinners who don't repent don't need to be forgiven. Only by letting them fall to the bottom of the abyss of hell forever, with their filthy bodies being whipped by poisonous vines forever, and their evil souls being tormented by poisonous flames forever, will it be the most benevolent and righteous act for their sins." Pause for a while. Amidst the cheers, he asked sarcastically, "Lady Sylvia, do you still remember the doctrine of this code?" This was a process of the trial of the temple. After the crime of the subject of the trial was read out, the presiding judge would randomly pick a suitable passage from the code of the temple and read it out. It could be regarded as the definition and reprimand of the crime, and then the punishment would be carried out. Now, Harvey deliberately skipped the process of reading out the crime and directly carried out the final judgment and reprimand of Sylvia. Well, he was indeed worthy of being the deacon of the court of judgment of the temple. His professional skills were very good. The content that was randomly picked out from the obscure code of the code was read out very smoothly, word for word. Sylvia didn't have this ability. This didn't mean that her faith wasn't firm, but that there were thousands of codes of the temple. It was so vast that even the Pope himself might not have read them all, let alone Sylvia, a combatant from the Department of Knights of the Temple. I don't remember, and I've never heard of it. Sylvia replied indifferently, but I have something to say, and I don't know if the deacon is willing to listen to it. Haha, is it about repentance? Tell me about it. It's about enlightenment. Sylvia raised her chin and looked up at the gloomy clouds in the sky. She slowly said, during this period of time, I've thought a lot about the doctrine, about my experience, and about what I've done over the years. Then, I began to hate myself. I feel that I'm the stupidest person in the world because I'm so ignorant and full of faith. That makes sense, but isn't this still repentance? Although it was a little uncomfortable to be looked down at from above, at this time, Harvey finally had a sense of superiority as the deacon of the Court of Judgment. With a faint mocking smile on his face, he officially entered the zone. But don't you think it's a little too late to repent now? Let me finish, thank you. Sylvia lowered her eyes slightly and looked directly at Harvey with a serious expression. For some reason, Harvey suddenly felt that he was being despised, although Sylvia's gaze was really sincere. She continued, but now, I realize that it's not the case. In fact, the most worthy of my hatred is you, a group of learned people without faith. I pity you. As soon as she finished speaking, Harvey's old face flushed red. It was burning as if he had been slapped in the face. In fact, the situation was more or less the same. Harvey had just shown off his knowledge and talent in front of Sylvia, reciting the contents of the rare code word for word. He was feeling good about himself, but now he had been slapped in the face successfully, and it was from the bottom of her heart. This was even more infuriating. You won't change. Harvey flicked his sleeves and turned around. His expression was extremely gloomy. He didn't want to talk to Sylvia anymore. He looked directly at the knight holding a torch and screamed, "Execute! Burn her to death! Now immediately!" Yes. Seeing the knight holding the torch close to the dry wood and branches, the atmosphere in the square suddenly became restless. They had waited for so long, wasn't it for this moment? Of course, there were also people who didn't think so. What a pity, such a beautiful woman was burned to death so easily before she could fall in my hands. It's simply too cruel, too. Cough, cough. Pause for a while. He coughed twice and suddenly raised his voice. It's too exciting. Let me tell you, just based on this trip wasn't in vain. Hearing that, Winston turned his head in surprise. He looked at Philip, who had been sighing a moment ago, but had suddenly raised his hands in approval. He couldn't help but be speechless. On the other hand, Alan, who was at the side, looked at the palm of the rich merchant's daughter deep in Philip's waist due to the angle. He pursed his lips and had a new understanding of a certain person's moral integrity. And at this moment, with a shrill scream, Philip suddenly jumped up like a rabbit that had been shot by an arrow. Let go, let go. Didn't I King admit my mistake and change? What else do you want? God. Looking at the rich merchant's daughter who had a dull look in her eyes, her lips trembling, and yet still holding on tightly to the soft flesh on his waist, Philip was instantly enraged. What God, are you crazy? Let go quickly, or I'll really get angry. No. God, true God. Before Philip could react, the rich merchant's daughter was the first to panic. Her words were jumbled up and incoherent. Alan and Winston, who were at the side, saw that something was wrong. They subconsciously followed her line of sight and looked up. Their bodies suddenly stiffened. F***CK. Chapter 940. F***CK. Looking up, not only were Alan, Winston, and the others dumbfounded, but even Philip, who was being pinched by the soft flesh on his waist, forgot about the pain for a moment. His mouth opened into a ridiculous O shape, and he could not close it at all. At the same time, There was a chain reaction in the square outside the window. No one knew who was the first to look up and discover it, but then it spread rapidly like a violent poison. Large groups of people looked up and stared blankly. Their bodies, movements, and every expression on their faces froze in an instant, and they were dumbfounded like statues. In the open space of the square below, where thousands of eyes were focused, Harvey and the other members of the temple were the last to react. It was not that they had discovered anything, but that the originally restless and excited people suddenly quieted down, and the atmosphere became extremely strange. Only then did they notice the abnormality and look up subconsciously. Oh, God, it had to be said that this was professionalism. Details could best reflect professionalism. When ordinary people's minds were suddenly hit by a strong impact, they would usually subconsciously call out the closest and most trusted person in their heart to protect them, such as mom, and so on. But clerics were different. In their pyramid of relationships, their parents and elders were definitely ranked below God. Therefore, when their minds were hit by a strong impact, they would subconsciously blurt out God. However, this time, it was not a meaningless exclamation, but an objective fact. As the saying went, there was a God 3 feet above one's head. Now, directly above Harvey and the others, about 300 feet in the air, there was such a majestic statue floating. A handsome face, half-exposed clothes, a muscular body, and a torch in his hand. Everything was alive. Every feature matched the statue of the God of Light that was erected on the roofs of churches all over Bran. In front of this seemingly huge statue, the tall statue of the judge, standing in the center of the square below, suddenly seemed extremely small and incomparable. A miracle. A real miracle. It had to be said that this scene was really frightening, and more importantly, it appeared at a special time. Silence, dead silence. Thousands of people below looked at the huge statue with their mouths open, and their minds were blank. They did not know if this sudden miracle was to punish Sylvia personally or to redress the injustice for Sylvia. However, no matter what the situation was, it was absolutely shocking to the people present. In front of the real miracle that they had witnessed with their own eyes, the crowd involuntarily copied the scene that had happened in the north. Their legs went soft, and they fell to their knees. No one knew who took the lead for the first time, but in a short moment, it was as if an irresistible gust of wind had blown into the square, and the thousands of people were like wheat stalks in the field, bending down and prostrating themselves on the ground. The scene was magnificent for a moment, and in the center of the square, Sylvia, who seemed to be receiving the worship of tens of thousands of people, looked up at the statue in the sky. The first thought that flashed through her mind was not a god, but a certain wretched figure. She was all too familiar with this scene, because not long ago, someone had played this trick right under her nose. Is he here? Why did you save me? At this moment, Sylvia, whose heart was as calm as still water even when she walked onto the judgment platform, felt her eyes suddenly become extremely sore. Her thoughts were instantly filled with a myriad of waves, complicated to the extreme. Even she herself didn't know what she was thinking at this moment, or what she should be thinking. Happy. I'm a member of the clergy. Why would I be happy that an evil heretic came to save me? Moreover, wasn't the reason why the temple had fallen to such a state because of him? So, shouldn't I hate him to the core? Yes, I hate him, that must be it. But, why do I feel like I'm being hypocritical? I was obviously looking forward to it before. Asya. Way. And what exactly are you thinking? She clenched her fists so tightly that her nails dug into her palms without her realizing it. Blinking her eyes, she didn't dare to lower her head because this was the only way to forcibly suppress something. At this moment, Sylvia's heart was in a complete mess. At this moment, some people had already recovered from their shock. As mentioned earlier, the south of Bran was very isolated from the north, and the flow of information was not smooth. Therefore, the people here basically didn't know that the so-called miracle in front of them had already been done by someone in the north. Of course, even if someone like Harvey knew, due to his identity, he was still bewildered and didn't dare to say too much. After all, no one knew whether this miracle was real or fake. If they really offended the majesty of the gods, they would be in big trouble. However, among them, there were some people who didn't care about the so-called gods at all. Stop pretending to be mysterious. Break. With a loud roar, a greenish-purple spear energy shot out rapidly from the oriental shop. With a flash of thunder, it instantly pierced through the statue in the air. Needless to say, this was Winston's attack. When he saw the statue for the first time, he was also shocked. However, as a member of the Sword God's bloodline, he didn't have a good impression of the Temple of Light, and he didn't have much respect for this big boss of the temple. Therefore, when he realized what was going on, he immediately attacked. However, this move was undoubtedly a bolt from the blue for the people present, and they couldn't accept it. A dash, seeing the spear energy pierce through the left chest of the statue and instantly pierce through it. The thousands of people couldn't help but scream, and their hearts skipped a beat. The timid ones even covered their eyes subconsciously and collapsed to the ground while trembling. It was over. Wasn't it the end of the world if they angered the gods? Who could survive? However, in the next moment, the world wasn't destroyed and everyone was still fine. After the greenish-purple spear energy pierced through the heart of the statue, it flew up into the sky. However, the huge statue wasn't damaged at all and was still hovering in the air. Instantly, there were thunderous cheers. The thousands of people patted their chests with excitement on their faces, thinking that the gods were indeed gods. How could they be sneak attacked by mortals? However, Harvey, who was standing by the window with his spear raised, frowned. Of course, he wasn't one of those ignorant people. Just one spear attack made him very suspicious. Was it a shadow? At this moment, suddenly, with a series of bangs, the square changed again. Dozens of small crystal bottles were thrown out from every corner of the crowd. Most of them were thrown into the open space around the judgment platform, and a few exploded in the square. Instantly, waves of suffocating black smoke rose into the air, and a large area of dazzling white light radiated into the surroundings, covering everyone in the square. Especially the open space in the center, it was completely covered. Damn it! After a momentary pause, Winston, who was looking down from high above, instantly understood. Whatever statue or miracle, it was just a cover. What the other party wanted was to make the thousands of people in the square kneel on the ground, because only in this way would they not be hurt by the flashing crystals, smoke bottles, and other alchemy tools that were thrown out. Therefore, the only ones who were really affected were. Winston suddenly turned his head and squinted his eyes fiercely at the center of the square. Good trick. Good scheme. As expected, the people of the temple who were shocked and doubtful didn't choose to kneel in front of the statue that they didn't know was real or fake. This was equivalent to taking the damage effect of all the alchemy tools. Although they couldn't see their current situation for the time being because of the thick fog and the dazzling white light, listening to the continuous waves of miserable howls coming from there, they knew what kind of embarrassing scene it was inside. At this moment, dozens of figures suddenly jumped out from the kneeling crowd and instantly got into the thick fog and white light, running toward the judgment platform where Sylvia was. Needless to say, they were naturally here to save her. However, it was also because of seeing these dozens of figures that Winston, who was about to jump out of the window, suddenly looked stunned. He paused, frowned, and shook his head. No, it's not him. These people were indeed not the Tang-in that Winston imagined, because the dazzling white light that burst out of them was the holy combat power that was unique to the temple. Owens, Sylvia, who was sitting on the platform, was also considered to be in a high position, so she recognized these figures that rushed toward her at the first moment. They were Owens and the other Puritans who had been trying to organize a rescue during the escort. Suddenly, Owens had also seen the fake miracle with her, so it was not surprising that he knew the method. And to say that, the corner of her mouth was slightly pursed, and Sylvia smiled sadly, not knowing whether it was disappointment, regret, or self-mockery. She lowered her head and murmured in a low voice, "So, it's not you? What a pity. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories."